and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where this week we are embarking on another deep dive into the career of one of the greatest directors of all time. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roca. I'm a writer, producer, and host, and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California, and excited to be opening yet another season on the Cine-Files of a fantastic director and a director that has influenced a lot of us, I would say, over the decades to fall in love with film, different types of film, and challenge us whether he succeeds or doesn't succeed in our appreciation of the medium of film.
And this one, strangely enough, came about very much the same way it did last year when we selected Quentin Tarantino, which is that every year we put out our annual listener survey, and we did just put it out. And so you can fill out this year's. And last time there were a whole bunch of Tarantino movies picked. And so we went, well, we'll do a deep dive on Tarantino. Well, this year, we've already done Wolf of Wall Street as our first 2013 movie.
Yes.
And the movie that was most requested from our early episodes, where we didn't do quite as extensive deep dives, that they wanted us to redo, our fans wanted us to redo Goodfellas. And we got, well, Wolf of Wall Street we've already done. Goodfellas, I think we're going to do a deep dive into the work of Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, I can't wait to have a lot of fun diving back into Scorsese's films and revisiting some of the ones we've already spoken about. Because what's great about when we revisit Steve too is we're older, we're different, and so it's fun to bring different perspectives to it than we had when we first recorded our episode on Goodfellas and what have you.
It's funny. I think this is the most intimidated and I would say I was really intimidated in moving into, actually I shouldn't say it, I'm gonna take it all back. I've been intimidated every single time. I was intimidated because it was when we were doing Citizen Kane. That was the first time we ever did this. It was the first time we broke a movie into two parts. I was intimidated when we did Alfred Hitchcock because we had never done Hitchcock. I was intimidated when we did Kurosawa because it's Kurosawa, for God's sake. I was intimidated when we did The Godfather and Coppola because people have been asking about that forever. I was intimidated when we did Spike Lee because obviously those films are controversial and deal with very, very complicated issues. I was intimidated when we did Tarantino for a similar set of reasons, and now I'm intimidated again when we're doing Martin Scorsese because the scale of this guy's career is kind of mind-boggling when you look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think I can go back to a time where I remember movies without Scorsese. And by that, I mean, sure, I can remember being a child and watching movies, but understanding or appreciating films like that was my birth. And so I don't remember existing in a world of loving movies and understanding how to analyze movies without having Martin Scorsese to be someone I can reference or go back to or whose work I can rewatch or interviews I can read or watch as well, to give me some perspective on film, because Martin is so great at speaking about more than just his own movies. He's great at talking about the history of movies, and there have been suggestions for films that he has thrown, in interviews and in conversation that have sent me down wormholes of actors and directors and movies that I would have never maybe opened the door to, including Akira Kurosawa, who Scorsese was a massive fan of and spoke about many, many times.
I think I'm going to say that I think Martin Scorsese is in the top 5 guests I would love to have on the Cine-Files. I mean, he would be one of the ultimate. Yeah, I know, right? Well, Martin, we're ready. We can work our schedule anytime, really. I agree. He is one of those. And I was thinking about it too. There are only a few filmmakers that I think made consistently important films over as long a period as Scorsese. I mean, Kubrick made great films, but he didn't make that many great films.
Right.
When we talked about Tarantino, we talked about 9 films. When we talked about Wells, it's like, well, Wells is the journey of Orson Welles.
Yeah.
Hitchcock, yes, he consistently made important films through almost his whole career. Spielberg is one, Kurosawa is one, maybe John Ford is another.
Yeah.
There's not that many, but
Billy Wilder. I think Billy Wilder's one too, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's like, so, people, there is a movie that he just made that is certainly an Oscar contention. It's not particularly my favorite film of his, but that's a long career where this guy is making important film.
And I think this is the first time, Steve, that we have done a season for someone who actually has a film currently out that we can also discuss within our discussion of this director. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm right or wrong on that. I don't know.
I don't think we have. I mean,
Yeah,
Tarantino didn't had a film out when we were talking about him, and Spike Lee didn't have one that was
that was
certainly not
current.
one that was in Oscar contention. It
Right,
wasn't
right.
that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So no, and the other guys weren't alive. So, oh no, Coppola is alive, but
Hopefully,
not
yeah,
making a
yeah.
lot of films at the moment.
True, true.
So John, let me ask you,
Yeah.
how did you first come to Martin Scorsese?
I think I'm pretty sure it was, Raging Bull.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that was my first exposure to Martin Scorsese. I don't know, I was, like, into my teens, and I remember that film being something that, because I was reading film magazines, that I could get my hands on, and I could sneak around in the small town of Virginia at the time, small town of Virginia, that I could sneak around the, magazine stand in the store and just stand there and read because, we were poor. I couldn't afford to pay for some of these magazines at the time, so I would just read what I could or go to the library and read whatever magazines that were 4 or 5 months after they'd come out, and I remember that Raging Bull was a film that people spoke about that I needed to watch, and so I just remember renting that probably from Video World, for those of you who remember Video World on the East Coast, and in Virginia specifically, and sitting down and watching it. And because it was a sports film, I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. Boxing, black and white sports. So I'll get the auteur, kind of filmmaking aspect of it all, but also the rousing sports story. And that is not what I got. And
No.
it was such a, to use a term that is connected to that film, it was such a punch in the face to watch that movie because it asked a lot of a kid. Like, I think I was 15, 14, 15 when I watched that movie, or 16 the first time. And it asks a lot of you to look at a guy's life and see the terrible relationship with his brother, the jealousy, all of that. Those all new, very adult emotions for a teenager who is also trying to kind of understand his own emotions. I have a fractured relationship with my brother, so there was elements of that. I was emotional. I could be aggressive when I was younger because I had a lot of self-hatred. And so I didn't understand that though as I was watching the movie. For me, it was more just like kind of like, wow, what is happening here? The slow motion, the way the blood was shot in the movie, the fighting sequences, the jarring changes in tone, and switches and cuts, and then leading to that heartbreaking moment reconciliation. That whether you want to say it's full reconciliation, but attempted reconciliation, and then seeing at the ending there, which was pretty sad in some
Yeah.
ways, to what he ended up versus what he could have been. And so, yeah, I'm sorry to go on a long-winded thing, but that's how it
Yeah.
came to Martin Scorsese. And from there, I went into Mean Streets and then started watching all of his other stuff as it was currently coming out from that point forward. Yeah. What about you?
I am not sure. I don't remember. Normally I have a good memory for this stuff. I think it was either Taxi Driver in
Ooh,
high school
right on.
or it was After Hours, which I saw in the
Oh, yeah.
dorm room my freshman year in college. So that's 86.
Right.
Like, I don't, and because I can remember watching Taxi Driver on the couch in my family room in my mom's house.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I remember, of course, seeing After Hours, which is a movie that really messed me up that I really loved at that time. But I'm not sure which one happened first. But
Right.
I do know
Yeah.
that those two films, obviously they're very different. I didn't understand that movies could be like that.
Right.
You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right. 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 Yeah.
Because I hadn't seen, and I had seen, like, I think I had seen things like The Godfather, and I'd seen One Flew
Right.
Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I'd
Yeah.
seen a bunch of 70s cinema
Mhm.
before that. But Scorsese is something else. Definitely those, the Taxi Driver, obviously a film of the 70s, but
Yeah.
but he's a whole other thing. And I wanted to we'll do some bio of him. And
Yeah.
like
Please.
most of the people we've talked about, I found things in their childhood that are like, this is the formation.
Mhm.
Orson Welles and his father and the school that he was sent off to, Kurosawa and the Tokyo earthquake and the death of his brother, Alfred Hitchcock
Yeah.
being put in a jail cell, Quentin Tarantino with the way he was raised and the men he was interacting with. There are always these things. And with Martin Scorsese, that's really true too. He was born in Queens in 1942, grew up in Little Italy. His parents both worked in the garment district. All four of his grandparents are Italian immigrants from Sicily.
Hmm.
And as a kid, he had very bad asthma. And because he had very bad asthma, he couldn't play sports and take part in all the kids' activities. And so his parents took him to the movies.
Yeah.
And right from the beginning, he was an obsessive movie watcher. Every time he could go see films, he would go see films, and he would see them over and over and over and over again. And because of his health and the asthma, and because he wasn't hanging out with all the kids, and this is something I completely relate to,
Mhm.
is he was an outsider. And
Mhm.
as an outsider, that formed him because, and this is what he said he had to figure out who he was and how he fits into the world. And that's totally my experience, like being shy and not having a lot of friends at a certain point in my childhood, and going like trying to work and figure out like, how does the world work? And the other thing that he was around, and this is what I mean by those things that formed him,
Mhm.
is that he was educated by priests, one priest in particular, Father Principe or Principe, I don't know how to say his name,
Mhm.
super important in his life. But then he's also around gangsters his whole childhood.
Yeah.
And they knew him and he knew them, and they would do nice things for them. And it wasn't until he was older that he realized that these were monsters.
Yeah.
They were guys in the neighborhood who he liked and liked him. And that, I mean, how could you get more Martin Scorsese than the priest
Yeah.
and the gangster?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's so fascinating when you look at his life story and you read the books or you watch the documentaries that have been done on him, and there have been so many, like those 1
Yeah.
hour documentaries or half-hour documentaries, is he was obsessed with films, as you mentioned, Steve, from a very early age.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in this way, cinephiles, no matter if they accomplish winning Oscars or just regular people working regular jobs, have a kinship, have a bond. This idea of falling in love with movies, it makes you even more of an outsider to
Mm,
people who don't. And I imagine at the time that he was growing up, there weren't that many cinephiles who were sitting there talking about the artistry of film that he could talk to. And he was obsessed with this. Like, he was obsessed with historical epics. He was obsessed with films like Black Narcissus and Red Shoes. So clearly he understood. He was one of these guys that was tapped very early with a knowledge and appreciation of movies. And I wonder if, being the son of these immigrants from Italy, if being educated by a priest, if all of this led him to believe that he had this gift that was given by God, and they had to
mm.
honor this gift, and maybe touched by God in a way. And this is what influenced him to become an artist and kept him doing it, because he felt that there was a responsibility to the gift that he was given. I don't know. I've never spoken with him. I don't think if I've ever read an interview where he has said that, but I would imagine, as you said, the influences of someone in a situation like that. Me being the son of immigrants, me being the son of a father who was devoutly religious, constantly read the Bible on Sundays and every other time that he could read the Bible. I understand what it's like, the pressure of wanting to, of feeling this need to succeed, but also like you've got to do it the right way and you've got to honor these principles. And so but I can't even imagine growing up around gangsters and what that situation is like, which of course we see a microcosm in the openings of Goodfellas,
Right.
the opening of Goodfellas, when we see him, that young kid, young Henry, being around all of that, and so it's just fascinating that he was able to have access to the dark and the light at the same time during a
Right.
formative time in his life.
I don't have an answer to whether or not he felt a calling, so to
Mm.
speak, as you said, but I do. And my brain just keeps going back to the Albert Brooks documentary, which we just talked about, where he's talking to Rob Reiner, and they're talking about the strange choices that Albert Brooks made in his career. And Albert Brooks says, "Oh, you think I have a choice?" That's how I feel about Martin Scorsese. I don't think he had a choice. I
Yeah.
think that it was like, this is just, I mean, and he did want to be a priest,
Yeah.
and went into the seminary and sort of the preparatory year, and he
Yeah.
flunked out.
Yes.
Like he just wasn't, that wasn't his destiny. And of course, he's continuing to watch films because at this point he's discovering Italian neorealism and the
Mm.
French New Wave and Fellini and Antonioni and Bergman, and as you mentioned before, Kurosawa. And at
Yeah.
the same time, as a kid, he's an altar boy. And I think the experience of being within that, not just in the religious world,
Yeah.
but in the show business of the religious world,
Yeah.
is that he was fascinated by the light and the language and the music and the stateliness and the performance of it all, like that. And I think all of that stuff comes together in bringing him where he ends up going. he went to Washington Square College, got a BA in English, and then he goes to get his master's in cinema at NYU. And he says that school saved him. You know,
Oh,
that's
yeah. I
um,
imagine so, because you have someplace to go with that desire and that love of film, someplace to put it, and maybe other people who share that with you. So you have some semblance of a community here with all of this. And I do want to say real quick, Steve, like the idea that he wanted to be a priest makes all the sense in the world because clearly there is something within him that desires to preach to others about something that he loves. And you could argue that his movies, in a way, are preaching to those of us who love movies about something he loved.
oh, that's an interesting way to put it. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Right,
That's
because he's not just he's not a hired director, like, he's not a hired hand. He's an
oh,
auteur,
yeah.
and an auteur has something to say within their films, and I think with the priesthood, that is something that he would be doing the same thing. I have something to say about the Bible, about God, about Jesus Christ, about the people in the Bible. It is preaching, and the Bible has, church has presentation, tradition, rituals.
Yeah.
The robe has to look a certain way. It can't be ratty. It's got to be ironed. So there's all this presentation in a way in church that mirrors what you might see in a movie in terms of costume and outfits and all of these kinds of things. So it makes sense that he would have an approach to it in that way.
Well, and I just keep going to the gangster and the priest, and
Mm,
both have codes of honor,
yes.
and both have conflicts within those codes of honor. And will they live up to those codes of honor? And I
Right.
think, and that's things that you see in, well, not all of his movies, but many, many of his movies is the internal struggle
Yeah.
with what is right, or what should I be, or how am I supposed to behave? Um, One of the stories I like, obviously, his parents are huge influences on him,
Yeah.
and appeared in his films, particularly his mom. Obviously, is there's a story that he'd hang out with his dad, and something would happen in the neighborhood, and his dad would tell a story, and he says, "Ah, that's a great story." Of course, you could never make a movie about something like that. And this is when he's in NYU, and he's watching films of the French New Wave and Italian neorealism, and he starts to ask the question of, "Well, why not?
Right.
Why can't you make a movie about that?"
Yeah.
He got some attention with his initial shorts out of NYU, and I've seen some of them. And having watched many student films, these are better than most of them. I didn't know that he worked as an editor for CBS News,
Yeah.
and CBS News offered him a job, full time job, benefits, be great, and he turned it down.
Yeah.
In 1967, he makes his first feature, which is "Who's That Knocking at My Door," which I saw a long time ago, but I
Mhm.
didn't see recently. I did rewatch a bunch of stuff, but Harvey Keitel is in that, and Thelma Schoonmaker is his editor on that film. And I'm going to say this right now: Scorsese has several people that he worked with many, many times. Obviously,
Mhm.
De Niro, DiCaprio, and Keitel being three of them. But I think there's an argument to be made that Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker is the greatest partnership in cinema history.
I think it's in contention for sure. You can make a strong case that it is the greatest, and if not one of the greatest relationships in film ever, because those films are so incredibly well edited, and to find someone who understands your language and how to speak your language, I think is probably essential for an auteur filmmaker coming out. And I'm sure Scorsese, for all his desire to say things, also had a worry and a concern and an insecurity that people would even watch his stuff, as all great artists
Yeah.
usually have. So having someone there who's at least in the pit with you, in the trenches with you, that you can trust is an invaluable resource when you're learning how to find your voice as a filmmaker.
And the editing room is where you make movies work.
Yes.
Movies don't work when you shoot. You might have a fantastic De Niro performance on the set,
Right.
but you got to put the thing together and make it happen. And and I'll just say this right at the beginning. We talked a lot about directors that are tyrants, like
Yeah.
with Ridley Scott or Kurosawa or Kubrick, or who can be really scary on the set. And we've talked about a few of the directors who are really friendly, like Ron Howard or Rob Reiner or people like that. I didn't realize until starting this research,
Yeah.
Scorsese's on the friendly side.
Mhm.
Scorsese is beloved. His sets are a joy.
Yeah.
Because in my brain, because his movies are so dark, I just assumed he was dark and angry and brooding, and that's not how he is at all. people a lot have a ball working with Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever seen anyone say anything negative about him. They may say negative things about the actors, that are in his movies, but they never, almost never say anything negative about being on the set with him. And I think another element of this, Steve, as we mentioned Thelma Schoonmaker, like, what is it like in the 1960s to have a female editor? It must have been such a.
Actually, that's not true. It's
Oh,
pretty
really?
common. Yeah, there were a lot of women editors throughout film history
Thanks for correcting me. I didn't know
because it was
that.
considered because like Verna Fields is Lawrence of Arabia. There
Mhm.
were a lot because it was it's such a meticulous job
Yeah.
that it wasn't very sexy, basically, and so there were a lot of women who did the job because a lot of guys didn't really want to do it.
And I bet
Um,
there were a lot of women who wanted to be filmmakers, but of
yeah.
course the doors were not open for them. So editing is the next best thing you could essentially do and feel like you had a hand in creating this movie.
And by the way, Thelma Schoonmaker sounded like she kind of started doing film stuff sort of on a whim and ended up in this sort of New York summer program. And that's where she met Marty and just went, this guy is head and shoulders above anybody else I've ever met.
It's crazy how that can work out for you. And I'm going to say this because I just recently watched an episode of Graham Norton on TikTok, and they had these little 2 or 3 minute episodes on TikTok, and they're clips from the main episodes. Tracy Ullman was on there.
Mm,
I'm listening to her because I love Tracy. I think she's very funny. She's talking about all the characters, and Graham asks her about The Simpsons, and she said the only reason that Julie Kavner voices Marge Simpson is because I was doing already so many characters on the show. I needed somebody to voice it over, and I was like, Julie, do you want to do this? And she's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then Dan was doing smaller characters on my show as well. And I said, what do you want? And he jumped at the chance just to do more work.
right.
So it was not like they had a massive casting call, put this all together. These are people in rep on the Tracy Ullman show who just happened to be at the right place at the right time and do a great job. You can't deny that. And that's what ended up setting them up for the rest of their lives, still making Simpson episodes. So it's just crazy luck sometimes who you can fall in with, but you've got to be ready for that moment, whether you know the moment is coming or not.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think I always knew that luck was involved, but it wasn't until like being here for a while that I went, oh, there's a lot of, I mean, there's because some of the stories of how someone got discovered,
Yeah.
it's just like there's no way that like 1,000 to 1 chance that was going to happen.
Well, let me ask you one more thing. Do you think we have Martin Scorsese today without Thelma Schoonmaker?
So I actually think we do because she did not edit some of the earlier films. So
Okay.
she edits Who's That Knocking on Your Door, and then I don't think she comes back to edit again until maybe Taxi Driver.
Wow.
So I don't think she edited Mean Streets.
Okay.
I mean, so like I do, but that being said, I don't think we would be doing a season of Scorsese without her.
Well, this is even more reason because I'm not a fan of the earlier stuff. I'm not a fan until Schoonmaker shows up here for Taxi Driver, if that's what it is.
I think
Because
it's that
that's
one,
when
I'm
I
not
start to fall in love. I mean, Mean Streets is, after it's Schoonmaker's editing that I think ends up making me fall in love with Scorsese even more,
listen, and I would love that would be, man, to sit in that room and hear those two people how they think about cutting film.
Yeah.
Because it would be talk about a masterclass,
Right. 100%.
Except they might not even speak to each other at this point, like because they're just telepathically linked.
You might be sitting in silence.
Because I don't know the longest amount of time you've ever sat in an editing room, but it is it is intense.
My office. That's the longest amount of time I've sat in an editing room is my office.
So and then Marty moves out to LA where he makes a couple of besties with guys like Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. And then Brian De Palma introduces him to this young actor named Robert De Niro. One other thing is Thelma Schoonmaker gets hired and Martin Scorsese with director Michael Whatley to go out to film this concert up in upstate New York called Woodstock. So Marty and Thelma are there trying desperately to make this movie. And then both Thelma and Marty are editors on Woodstock, which is a remarkable film, by the way.
Yeah, guys, if you have never seen Woodstock, it is a very long documentary, but it is an incredible documentary about that time. Rarely do they make good documentaries about film festivals. that one and the Monterey Pop ones are the top two, in my opinion, that I've ever seen.
So, and I will tell you my tiny, tiny connection to this,
Mm.
which is the producer of Woodstock, the guy who bought the footage and
Oh,
then hired Thelma and Marty and a bunch of other people to cut it,
yeah.
is Fred Weintraub.
Oh,
Fred Weintraub was the owner of the Bitter End, the famous club in New York where Woody Allen and all sorts of other people were playing. And then he came to Hollywood where he produced another little film called Enter the Dragon.
oh, yeah.
And he apparently on his lot on Universal would just randomly dose people with acid when they came into his office because that's cool. And I worked for Fred Weintraub in the early 2000s and wrote a screenplay that he screwed me out of credit on that has
Whoa.
been made. There's a film of mine that does not have my name on it.
Mm.
It's terrible. I watched it once when I was very, very drunk. Stars Lance Hendrickson. It's called, what the fuck's it called? Dream Warrior. It's called Dream Warrior.
Dream Warrior.
Yeah, it is. I remember one of the things, I'll just say very briefly, one of the characters was the handsome 25-year-old martial arts expert named Yoshi.
Okay.
It was like a post-apocalyptic mutants on a run movie.
Sounds genius. Yeah.
Would you like to know who was cast in that part?
Who was cast in the
Isaac
Asian
Hayes.
part? Who?
Isaac Hayes.
Isaac Hayes of all people. Love it.
It's terrible. I mean, the movie's horrendously awful. But I did have the Fred Weintraub experience. He didn't actually dose me with acid. But what I did find out is there's a moment in Mean Streets, because Martin Scorsese at this time, when he's making Mean Streets, is sleeping on Fred's couch.
Wow.
And that there's this moment where De Niro brings some young women into the bar and introduces one of them as Sandy Weintraub, because that's Fred Weintraub's daughter.
Oh, wow.
Is in Mean Streets. Anyway, but before we get to Mean Streets, after Woodstock, he makes a little film for Roger Corman called Boxcar Bertha, which I have never seen. Have you ever seen it?
No, I have no desire to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's starring Barbara Hershey. And what's the most important thing about this movie is that during the shooting of this, Barbara Hershey gives Martin Scorsese a book called The Last Temptation of Christ.
Wow.
That's where he read this book and becomes obsessed with making this film for the next couple of decades.
Right. And this also tells me, how can I say this correctly? Because I don't want people to think I'm having a hubris when I say this, but like this, as a guy who is also a lapsed Catholic, I would say, although I do believe in God, I believe in tenets of my religion, but I also love film. I love to explore religion through film and Last Temptation of Christ. So I feel a kinship with Marty that something like that would excite him as opposed to offend him. And I think that's speaks to an artist. An artist is open to explore these things and question their own faith, question their own beliefs, question what they've been told versus versus not doing that. And I think that's great that Marty got connected to this book very early in his life.
We brought it up already, and you sort of expressed a little bit of your feelings about it, but 1973, he makes Mean Streets.
Mm-hmm.
I did rewatch a smattering of Scorsese movies before doing this. There was no way I was going to rewatch all of them. And I watched Mean Streets.
Yeah.
I think I don't love the movie.
No.
But I think in terms of the setting, the world, and the style, you can see this is this filmmaker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is a practice for the real game. And when you're watching it, you can tell that. You can see that. This is almost like Steve, like you would know as a writer, right? This is a draft. This is a draft of the great films that he's going to make down the road. And you can see the elements of what he's going to do, where he's going, and that he's going to mature even more once he gets older, once he gets more perspective, more money, and access to these other actors to bring his visions to life. And for sure, you can see their shades of it. To me, it's a bit of an awkward, clumsy film. And the Keitel isn't the best lead for a film like this, in my opinion. And I think that's what kind of keeps me out of it. But De Niro is electric.
Oh, yeah.
You immediately know from watching that movie who this guy is going to be. Like, you can tell when you're watching. Like, goodness gracious.
He's remarkable in the thing. And it definitely, and you also go, I think, no, we've never seen this voice before.
Yeah.
No one's ever, and I go back to the stories of his dad saying this would be a great story, but of course you could never make a movie. And Marty going, why not?
Yeah.
That's what this is. Ellen Burstyn, who's a big star at this moment, because it's after The Exorcist,
Yeah.
chooses Martin Scorsese to make her next film, which is Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which I haven't watched in a long time. It's really good.
Yeah.
That's my memory of it.
Yeah.
And then Ellen Burstyn wins an Oscar for it.
Yeah.
And then it's 1976 and Taxi Driver.
Yeah. I mean, look at the jump, dude, to Taxi Driver. That's a guy who was younger doing Mean Streets, doing Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And then, I got to tell this story. And this is where sometimes a director, a creative, that project shows up at the right time when you're about to enter the height of your powers. And this is the time with Taxi Driver. And he's capturing what is going on in the 70s. So as great of a filmmaker he was still very aware of what's going on in the world in the 1970s. And Steve, you mentioned the CBS thing. I think him working that job made him aware of what's going on in the world, politically, globally, domestically, all the stuff, being aware of it, influencing him as he makes Taxi Driver very topical at the time in the 1970s. We've just come out of a decade where we had multiple assassinations of political figures.
This is also his first collaboration with Paul Schrader.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about Taxi Driver. It was actually one of our very early two-parters. But
Yeah.
I think we had an amazing conversation, and we are definitely going to re-release our conversation about Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Needless to say, this is a groundbreaking film in every conceivable way. I mean, and again, you go to, look, Last Picture Show and, Godfather and The Conversation and all the things that are happening in this era of film.
Right.
But Taxi Driver is so aggressively, disturbingly ambiguous, difficult, funny, odd, peculiar, unique. It is its own thing.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll say about it, which I know I said when we talked about it, is there was times where I've seen it where it's been the heaviest, most serious movie I could imagine.
Yeah.
And then there was a time where I saw it with a big audience and it was hilarious. And both of those things are totally true about that film.
Yeah.
It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, which is remarkable for this kind of film and this filmmaker at this age.
Yeah.
And one other thing that we should say is those friendships that we talked about with Coppola, De Palma, Spielberg, Lucas, that's key to how these movies are getting made, because all these guys are showing each other their films.
They're competing with each other while also showing each other their films. Yeah.
Well, and I know that Steven Spielberg came in and helped him recut the ending of Taxi Driver, that final gun battle, because Scorsese didn't quite have it,
Yeah.
And I just love that story. The next film is one I haven't seen in a really long time. It's 1977, New York, New York, with De Niro and Liza Minnelli.
So let's talk about this, because I think this is a seminal moment. These next two films are seminal moments in Martin Scorsese's life, right? Because you have Taxi Driver, and everything he's been doing has been leading to Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Right? The influences of his life, the studying that he's done here at college, the job at CBS, the relationships that he has fostered, and then boom, we get to Taxi Driver. And he captures the zeitgeist of the pop culture with politics, with the feeling of the lone gunman, which was becoming a thing. This is the 70s, Summer of Sam, serial killers. This is all becoming this feeling of dread and fear that is encapsulating people. The idea of pornography being something people are talking openly about since Midnight Cowboy in 1969. All these things are slowly happening in the change in the pop culture. So what happens? I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think he gets scared. I think he gets intimidated. I think he's like, how do I follow this up? How do I challenge myself? How do I try something new? Let's put De Niro in a romantic, not dark, but romantic, how can I say this? Failed romance with Liza Minnelli in a film here, New York, New York, that is an homage to my city, right? To the city I grew up in. And he, in my opinion, compared to other movies, he fails miserably in this movie. Now, some of you out there will defend that movie because every movie has a defender, which is an insane thing to discover as you get older as a film lover. So some of you may love New York, New York, but it is not a good movie. I think De Niro is horribly miscast in the role that he's playing, and it doesn't work. So I just wonder if he ran to something that was safe for him, And then after that, we get to The Last Waltz. And I think that's him going back to something he knows, like Woodstock. This is a band I love. This is a thing I know. Let me lick my wounds a little bit before I'm ready to get back out there with another movie. Those are my opinions. What are your thoughts on these movies?
So I'm going to give the exact opposite opinion.
Please go
which,
ahead.
which is my exact opposite opinion. Is I don't think it's fear. I think it's arrogance. I think he comes out a Taxi Driver. He's doing a lot of cocaine at this point, and he
Oh,
goes,
fair.
"I could do everything. I could do. I could totally. I love those old classic musicals. I could do it. Yeah, that's what I think it is. I have almost no memory of this movie at all. I remember because there was that era, and you and I both had it. College, and now you're really digging into the Cinephile thing, and that's when I rented a ton of Martin Scorsese movies, and I rented this, and I just remember my only memory is watching it, going, "What the fuck is this?" like I don't understand this movie at all. Here's something I didn't know. The same year, 1977, he directs a Broadway show starring Liza Minnelli called The Act, which is a major flop.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about that, and sends him into a serious depression and, of course, lots more cocaine.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, The Last Waltz. I only saw The Last Waltz. It was during the pandemic, maybe 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That movie's amazing.
Yeah, same, bud. Because the documentary came out. The Brothers, the Robbie Robertson one that came out during the pandemic, and I got sent a screening link for it, and I watched it. And I was like, I should go see. I should watch The Last Waltz. I've never watched it, and yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Absolutely
great
movie.
And here's something I didn't know. So this is Robbie Robertson. This is the band, which had been Bob Dylan's backup band that became the band. And then this is when they broke up. And then after they broke up, Robert Robertson was really lost. He just didn't know what to do with himself. And he goes to Martin Scorsese and says, "I'm lost. I don't know what to do with myself." And Martin Scorsese goes, "Well, why don't you move in with me? We can watch movies all the time." And so Robbie Robertson moves in with Martin Scorsese, and they sat and watched movies all the time and did a lot of cocaine. And I just like, that's hilarious.
Yeah. I feel like he's a guy who could never be alone. You know those people who can never be alone? I feel like Scorsese is one of those guys. It doesn't mean that he has to be around people like all the time, but maybe one or two people. And you don't even have to be in the same room with him, just be in the same house. And I just have this feeling. So it would make sense. Plus, I mean, Robbie Robertson is probably a musician, is something that almost all film people revere and respect, because you're being a creative in a completely different medium that most film people, most creatives don't know how to do. So I'm sure beyond just watching movies, they had great conversations about music versus film composition, like music composition versus film composition. That must have been a joy to sit in the room with them and listen to.
I have a question for you. We've kind of gotten through the first decade of his film.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't know if I have an answer to it, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is at this point, how do you think Martin Scorsese has changed cinema?
At this point?
Yeah.
Like at this point in his career?
Yeah.
This is before Raging Bull.
Yes.
It's a great question. I don't know that he has individually changed cinema if we're looking at his 70s movies. Now, before people light their torches, what I'm saying is that there were so many great filmmakers in the 1970s. Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, you could even say Hal Ashby, a number of great filmmakers during that time, Friedkin. So he is part of a crew of people who are coming through. So collectively, they absolutely changed cinema by ripping away the veneer of like the old school stuff and the proper way of saying things or proper way of doing things, and kind of almost go all the way back to Brando method and James Dean method type of acting, but through filmmaking, through direction. And so that's what you see in the 1970s. And I think collectively, he is part of a group of people who change the perception of cinema, who elevate cinema to an art form that I don't know that it necessarily had in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Again, don't light your torches. I just mean the auteur approach here was much more distinct than the classic film. So it is a sea change in the 1970s, completely about what we as an audience want to see from our films versus what we had gotten up to that point.
So first of all, quick podcasting tip. if you ever don't know how to answer your own question, just ask the question, and then you get to listen to the other person who's really smart say a bunch of really interesting things, and that will give you the time to start to come up with your own answer. This has been so. First of all,
Very
everything you
kind
said
of
is
you to say.
great.
Thank you.
But secondly, here's what my answer actually is.
Mm.
I remember when we did Citizen Kane,
Yeah.
and we said this is one of the most influential movies of all time, and yet, in my opinion, and I think you agreed with me when I said this, is there's nothing like Citizen Kane.
No, nothing.
People don't, it's not like people imitated Citizen Kane after Citizen Kane. There's all sorts of ways it influenced people, but they didn't imitate it.
Yeah.
That's actually how I feel about Martin Scorsese up to this point. Is I don't think anybody is, that doesn't mean that anybody's doing what he's doing.
Right, sure.
I think they're being influenced by him, but I think his filmmaking is totally unique.
Yeah.
So we've gotten to a story, and I've heard multiple versions of this story, and I will say multiple versions of the story. Martin Scorsese goes into the hospital. He's maybe bleeding from his mouth or he's really, really sick. I've also heard Martin Scorsese went into the hospital because of cocaine.
Yeah.
Which is way, way too much cocaine. And he was on death's door. And De Niro comes to him. And they'd been talking about Raging Bull. Up to this point. And Scorsese hadn't quite, De Niro wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And Scorsese was on the fence about it. And the two different ways I've heard this story, one way is that he said, look, the only reason that you should make this movie is if not making it would mean that you have no reason to live.
Wow.
That's why you should make a movie. Because if I don't make this movie, I have no reason to live. And Scorsese at that moment said, yes, that is how I feel about this film. That's one story.
That's awesome. Okay.
The other story is he came to visit him in the hospital and asked him if he wanted to live or die.
Right.
And if you want to live, you have to quit cocaine and we'll make this movie. Now, it could be that both of these stories are kind of true.
Right.
But whatever it is, this is a moment in his life where he's really having a major drug problem. His career, you know, we're after New York. We're after the flop on Broadway. He's hit some real depression. Last Waltz is a great film.
Yeah.
But like he's at a real crossroads and they decide to go all in on Raging Bull.
Wow. This is incredible because this is yet another moment where De Niro is involved in a drug situation. Because remember with Belushi, he had been with Belushi before the Belushi situation, before he died.
Right.
So I think Robert sensed that this was something that was dangerous for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think he tried to get Belushi off of the cocaine himself as well. If I remember some of the stories, and please correct me guys if I'm off, but I remember, that's what I remember. Him and Robin Williams, and Robin, of course, completely after the Belushi thing, reduced, if not stopped, his drug use. But De Niro understood it was an issue. And so having someone in your life like that is an invaluable thing. Someone who understands where you're going and is letting you make your choices. But then you hit that wall where that person has to come in and be like, look, if you go down this path, keep going this path, it's done. If you don't, we can do this film if you're willing to make the change. And remember, Marty is influenced by religion. It's a very big deal for him. So the idea of admitting the sin and doing the penance in order to come out of it and be a better person is something that may have occurred to him in those conversations with De Niro. If those allegedly happened, then, that might have been a thing where he himself was trying to push himself as far as possible, because most creatives are inherently self-destructive. And so once they achieve a certain level of success, and there's an imposter syndrome that goes on with a lot of creatives as well. So in those moments, it could very well be possible that Marty Scorsese, who we all revere and worship and bend the knee and all, this is still a young man in the 1970s, dealing with a lot of feelings about himself and finding his voice and who he is and having this fame and celebrity thrust upon him. What's the reaction? Cocaine usually is a place to go and hide and feel good and, feel like, oh, you don't have to think about the negative stuff anymore. But of course you crash. So you do more of it. And as you do more of it, you destroy your body more and more as you're doing it. And you keep chasing it. And then boom, terrible things can happen.
Yeah.
So maybe De Niro, as his friend coming in, saying to him, almost like a priest, like you've got to stop and repent, and then you can move forward again and share your gift with the world, and we'll do this movie. And it's not a coincidence that it's a movie about a guy also confronting his tendencies to self-destruct. So there's a lot here within this story that leads us to Raging Bull from my own personal analysis of it, which I may
Well,
be way off, but that's
well, I'm really curious about it, and we're not going to go into detail about
right.
Raging Bull here because guess what? After we redo our Goodfellas, we're going to do Raging Bull, and
Yes, we are.
so
Yes.
I haven't watched it in a while. But knowing this stuff about this moment, I think that's going to inform a lot of what we see as we explore that film, which I
Yeah.
can't wait for because that is a lot of a movie.
Yeah.
1983, The King of Comedy. And I'm going to say, because I watched Mean Streets, I watched King of Comedy, I watched Casino, I watched some other films.
Yeah.
I think this run, particularly going from Raging Bull to King of Comedy, Robert De Niro, it's why he's one of the great actors of all time.
Yeah.
How many people could play Jake LaMotta and then play Rupert Pupkin in King of Comedy back to back? I mean, that's like,
Yeah. Right.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
His performances. What are your feelings about the King of Comedy?
I tell you what, the King of Comedy, when I first watched it, I didn't get it. Right. Again, it felt like almost like, oh, here we go, New York, New York, right after this incredible film. And so for me, I was like, I don't get it. It wasn't until I was older that I went back and rewatched it and fell in love with the movie, and still am in love with the movie, because that movie is topical for any decade. And nowadays, the idea that you have people who, God, I want to say this correctly without stepping into minds, feel that they're owed attention, feel that they're owed a celebrity simply because they like another person who's famous. They feel like, oh, I can do what they do, therefore I should achieve the fame they have. I should have what they have. Why isn't it happening for me? Okay, I'm going to go and break all these, or cross all these lines and break all these laws because I have a belief that I deserve this, even though I haven't earned it, like Jerry, I forget his name in the movie, Jerry Lewis's character in the movie, but like he has. So I'm just going to skip over a bunch of steps and go and get it. And the fact that it works out for him is a very frustrating ending for me, even though it's a great ending for the movie, because he breaks so many barriers and walls that you're not supposed to do. And I don't mean that in a respectful way. I mean in the kind of shitty way.
He kidnaps a guy. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
yeah.
Nowadays, you see fans of people on YouTube or fans of people who are actors or creatives, and they think because they have an overwhelming love of this person, they think they can do exactly what that person does, as if charm is interchangeable. The reason certain people succeed is because they are uniquely built to succeed in a certain field because they are uniquely constructed to do so. You haven't had their upbringing. And so some people think that they deserve that as well, simply because they see someone else doing it and they think, I can do it and I'll do it. And then when they don't achieve the success, they get mad, they get frustrated, and they end up being very angry and leaving angry, toxic messages on other people's YouTubes because they're mad that they haven't achieved the success that other people have. And so Popkin is a case study in ultra fandom that actually works out and is a dangerous story for the people who achieve a certain level of fame, that these people are always lurking out there trying to ride your coattails to success, you know?
So it's funny. It sounds like you and I had a very similar experience because I actually do think that I watched King of Comedy at a very similar time to when I watched New York, New York.
Right.
And I had a similar sort of like, I liked it more than New York, New York, but I was like, oh, that was a weird, uncomfortable movie. I don't know how I feel about it. I didn't really revisit it very much. And then I watched it again a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And in today's world, man, this movie is with influencers and
That's what I'm saying.
YouTubers and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like this, and just
Mhm.
the mix of reality and showbiz
Right.
and sensationalism, all this stuff. And it's also really scary in this weird way,
Yeah.
you know. And Sandra Bernhard is like terrifying, like a terrifying psycho person, and
Right.
beautiful casting. But I also think Jerry Lewis might be some of the greatest piece of casting of all time in this movie.
This movie is the breaking of the long held belief of Jerry Lewis being this goofy moron, right?
Right.
I know the MDA telethon did that as well to a degree because you saw Jerry's real voice. But this movie, you saw the Jerry Lewis that people talk about behind the
Yeah.
scenes. The kind of dismissive, arrogant,
Yep.
rude prick that a lot of people felt Jerry Lewis was behind the scenes and had experienced, but also a guy who was incredibly talented because Jerry contributed so much to the world of film, which a lot of you may not know about. Do your research. There's a lot that Jerry did that changed how people make films and create films and edit films. And so this is where we got to see this in this movie. And Sandra Bernhardt symbolizes the crazy fan.
Oh yeah.
Rupert Pupkin, De Niro's character, is, you always correct me on this, he's either the psychopathic fan or the sociopathic fan. It's the fan that doesn't care who he's hurt.
It's not me correcting you because I always get confused by those two words.
Okay. So
Yeah.
someone seems to correct me all the time about that. But I keep doing research on it, and I can't
I
understand.
think they're very similar. So
very similar. One of them acts on it, one of them doesn't. But either way, it's a person who doesn't care about other people's feelings because all they care about is getting their needs met.
That's sociopathic. Sociopathic is not caring about other people's feelings.
Yeah,
Psychopathic is more cuckoo crazy.
Right. So maybe Bernhardt is the psychopathic, De Niro is the sociopathic because he doesn't care what anyone thinks, and he doesn't care about showing up in people's houses, anything, just so he achieves what he wants to achieve.
Yep.
So he's more ruthless than Sandra Bernhardt's character. She's just all over the place. He is very clear, which is what's dangerous about him.
Yeah, it is. It's so funny. That movie grew on me so much more the last time I watched it.
Yeah.
And next, it's 1983. He makes a deal with Paramount. They greenlight his next film, which is going to be a little movie called The Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
I had no idea that there was an entire failed production of Last Temptation of Christ.
Ooh, tell me.
So this is, by the way, obviously the book came from Barbara Hershey. We mentioned that before.
Right.
This book is by Nico Kazantzakis. And no, I really want to read this book. It sounds like totally my kind of book.
Yeah.
Paramount wanted Jesus to be played by a little actor named Robert De Niro. De Niro says he has no interest in doing this at all. He's like, I can't see myself in robes. I can't see myself playing that kind of part.
How you doing?
and what he's, and I love the way De Niro talks about this. He's like, the only reason you should do a movie, again, it's that question he asked before of like, if I don't feel that I could go on living and if I didn't do this. And he didn't feel this way about playing Jesus. And he goes to Scorsese, who's his buddy, and he says, it's just not one we should be together on.
Yeah.
But he says this, and I love this. De Niro said to Martin Scorsese, if you really have a problem, if you need me, I'll do it. If you're up against the wall and have no other way to make it, I'll do it as a friend.
Right.
I just love that. You know?
I love the idea of Robert De Niro as Jesus. I want to see that movie. Hey, Judas, you betrayed me a little bit. A little bit.
Well, instead they cast Aidan Quinn.
Oh, Aidan Quinn. Oh, interesting choice. Okay.
And playing Pontius Pilate would be Sting.
Oh, wow. Even after Dune, you would put him in that? Okay.
And then they have the money. He's scouting locations. They're getting their sets ready. There's budgets. There's schedules. They're about to go, and Paramount gets cold feet and cans the project. And this is like, you know, this is the biggest disappointment of his career. He literally has wanted to make this movie for like 15 years. He's put everything he has into it. It's the most important film. And he is just absolutely wrecked by this.
Of course. I mean, again, it's his religion, right? I mean, this is a massive thing for him to do this movie. And it's because he's coming in to his later years as a man as well. So this is the time when he can tell the story in his mind. But logically, how many studios are willing to risk doing a film like this that upends people's perception of the Jesus Christ story in religion? It's a massive thing to undertake for a studio.
And he decides, I need to make a movie right now. Like, I just have to go make a movie. I can't wait for a lot of money. I can't wait for a big project. Everything's falling apart. Gets a script, shoestring budget, and in 1985 he goes off and makes After Hours, which I rewatched
Yeah.
for this. I totally like it.
It's a fun film. It's, if nothing else, it's a fun film for sure.
Yeah. I think for what it is, it totally works. It is bizarre and odd and has this crazy cast, and it just and it seems like, it's super low budget. It's all shot on location down in the East Village, I think, or somewhere like that, and shot almost all nights, super, super fast, and it seems like they're just having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize, After Hours, he won Best Director at Cannes for. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And the next movie, again, I watched this again. This is also one of the very first Scorsese movies I ever saw, and that's The Color of Money.
Yeah. This is probably the first Scorsese movie I saw in the theaters. But because I think I saw Raging Bull, as I said, I think I saw it as a 14 or 15-year-old, and then Color of Money comes out, and I go to see it. And I thought it was a good movie, certainly. I don't think I've seen it since I saw it in the theaters, to be honest with you. I don't think I've seen it since the 80s.
So I
had no interest. I don't know. Yeah, tell me, you rewatched it?
Yeah, I rewatched it. I had a soft spot for it. If you can get past the ridiculousness of Tom Cruise at times in that movie, it's totally enjoyable. For me, it is the only sort of mainstream Scorsese movie, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Where it's just a movie. It's much more of a Paul Newman movie than a Martin Scorsese movie.
Right.
Other than those amazing camera angles and shots of the pool and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's just, I like watching Paul Newman go through this story,
Yeah. Well, I mean, because he's a great actor. Yeah.
It's a great actor, and it's revisiting something which The Hustler is one that's been on our list forever, and at some point we're going to get to it. It's not as dark as The Hustler, but I find it to be I know you have movies like this, which is like, I'll just put that on.
Yeah, it's one of those for sure. Well, and you're right about Tom. This is the frustrating part, because obviously I am a charter member of the Tom Cruise fan club, and I will take no negative feedback on that. But I wish we had gotten the Tom Cruise from the late 90s in the body of the Tom Cruise for this film. Because you're right. This is, and I think that, if you ever strip it away and catch Tom at like 3 a.m, when he's had a few and he's willing to talk to you honestly about something, I think this is Tom doing way too much because he was nervous to go toe to toe with a legend like Paul Newman. So instead of creating a character that was somewhat believable, you went a bit cartoony, and he defaulted back to that Tom Cruise thing that had been his thing in the 80s. And it's unfortunate, because you're right. The film, because Mastrantonio is matching Newman step by step. People need to put more respect on Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's work. That is a great fucking actress. And she was so good in that movie. Forrest Whitaker had a great cameo there as well. But she understands what movie this is. So does Paul Newman. Tom doesn't 100% get it, because he still is trying to be a superstar. And that kind of makes the film not as enjoyable for me as it should be.
Right. Next, and one of the interesting things about Scorsese that I really like, for the most part, he follows his interests. He's not a work for hire director. He's not gigging it up. He's doing what he's interested in. And the next thing he does is Michael Jackson's Bad, which is beloved, People
love that music video.
Yeah. I don't particularly, I'm not a huge Michael Jackson guy.
Yeah.
And obviously there are other reasons to not be a huge Michael Jackson guy at this point, but it's a big deal.
Yeah.
This movie. And then in 1988, we are back to The Last Temptation of Christ.
Well, don't brush past this, the Bad video. This is Wesley Snipes versus Michael Jackson. This is the beginning of Wesley, man. And it's an interesting music, and music videos in the 80s were an art form, dude. 80s and 90s, right? Wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
And so to see him coming in, and this is the greatest superstar in the world, at the time in Michael Jackson as a recording artist with one of the greatest directors in the world at the same time. And so coming together, it's such a weird crossing of Hollywood streams. You know what I'm saying? Like when Brando showed up in that music video near the end for Michael Jackson, Rock My World, you're like, what is happening here? But there are people who know each other in Hollywood. And maybe this is a little bit of Marty getting older, starting to get older. And he's like, well, let's see what I can do with this. Let's have some fun with the music video. And does it, because it also done an amazing stories for Spielberg's
Right.
series as well. One of those. So, yeah.
So the one movie I really did intend to rewatch and I didn't is
Mm.
Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh,
I really wish I had. I haven't seen it in a really long time. Obviously, we have Willem Dafoe and David Bowie replacing Aidan Quinn and Sting,
yeah.
which I think is an improvement on both. I remember really liking this film. And the reason I really wanted to rewatch it, and I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I didn't, is that I know a lot more. I've read more about religion and about Jesus. And I think the movie would be more profound to me this time,
Yeah.
knowing a lot more about it than I did before. But
Are we
what's
adding?
your reaction to this film?
Well, first of all, are we adding this to? Are we doing an episode on Last Temptation of Christ or no?
We haven't discussed doing it.
I mean, if there's an open slot,
Well, I mean, so, and this is we're just have this. This is a live Cine-Files discussion right now. So the plan was Goodfellas and Raging Bull.
yes.
Do you want to do Goodfellas, Raging Bull, and Last Temptation of Christ? Because then we're doing Scorsese until June.
Well, I need to know that you can handle it because I know Coppola, and I don't mean that in a negative way, because I saw what Coppola did to you. I saw what The Godfather did to Steve Morris, and it was not pretty by the end because he was Coppola'd out, which I have never achieved in my life. So the fact that that could be happening to you as someone who loves those films scares me. So yeah, I would absolutely love to do these three back to back, or save Last Temptation for later on down the road, for like during the fall when all these award winning films awards worthy contender films come out. Could be where people are in the mood, for Last Temptation of Christ, as opposed to us doing it in the spring when people are maybe a little bit happier about them.
Although it is a classic Easter film. I mean,
Good point. You know what? All right, fine. We're in. We're doing it. Fuck it. We're doing
okay, Easter.
it. Sorry, God. But yeah, look, Last Temptation of Christ is a film that I resisted for a very long time because of my own religion things. And I was not quite 100% ready to watch the movie when it first came out. I remember it being a big drama when it came out and the protests and all of that. So I waited until a little bit later in the 90s to watch it on VHS. And it was an experience for sure to watch this movie. And what I went through watching the movie, and right at a time where I'm in my 20s questioning my own beliefs about religion and about things, having battles with my father about his perception of religion versus mine, taking courses in college that talk about how the Bible has been rewritten multiple times, depending on which version you read and the historical approaches to it. So it was at a perfect time when I finally watched it to be more receptive to the controversial, quote unquote, ideas in the movie and the way things are laid out in the film. But I think it's a bold film and that does not pull any punches in exploring the story of Jesus from this angle.
Well, I'm kind of excited about this actually because I will read the book. I'll probably reread. I think it was Jesus, a Biography was the very scholarly book I read on the life of Jesus. It's by a Jesuit priest.
Ooh.
And just the thing that I remember from it was just the exploration of the idea of what it means for God to take human form to experience what it is to be human. And I think that is perfectly in line with the Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
And look, you say that you saw me get exhausted at the end of Coppola. I was also exhausted at the end of JFK, and I'm sure I'll be exhausted after Raging Bull, and I'll be exhausted after Last Temptation of Christ. But that's awesome because those are the times where we really do what I don't think anybody other than the Cine-Files does.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to break down a movie like we're going to do it, and so that's really exciting. And
I just don't want to be into going to a hospital room and saying to you, "Do you really want to do this? Because you've broken down from exhaustion. We're
Well,
only going to do this if you really want to do
well,
this."
for A, that got him out of the hospital room.
That's true. That's true.
B, I don't do cocaine because I think cocaine would be a bad drug for me. I think I would like it too much. I don't do that. And C,
Yeah.
the result of that leaving that hospital room was Raging Bull.
Bro, true. Good point.
You know,
The result may be one of our greatest episodes ever. Good
it
point.
might be. It might
Shall
be.
see.
John, New York Stories.
What do you want me to say?
I actually totally disagree. I
Go
think
ahead.
the Coppola movie is terrible.
Yes,
It's
horrific.
It's a train wreck. It is so much a waste of space. The Woody Allen movie, he's funny and it's kind of funny.
Mm.
I think Nick Nolte and I think it's Rebecca De Mornay in that film, Life Lessons. I think that's an amazing short film.
Okay.
I really like it. Yeah. All right. You're not a fan.
I'm not a fan of that entire project.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so uneven and just not for me. And I've never watched the film again. Like I just never watched that whole sequence of films ever again because it just kind of it tarnished Woody a little bit for me. It really showed me that Coppola's done. And although Marty's might have been better, it might have only been better in comparison to the other ones. So I couldn't properly gauge it when I watched it. So yeah. But I mean, if we wanted to watch it and do a short on it, I guess we could do that. But I'm not jumping to do that.
Your enthusiasm is really making me want to do that.
Enthusiasms.
1990 Goodfellas.
Yeah, man.
Can't wait to jump back into it.
Yeah, we're not going to dive too deep into it because we're going to do a whole episode on it. But
episodes.
Sorry,
let's be honest.
Episodes. But absolutely, they're a seminal movie, and this is where you could ask the question again.
All right, what do you feel has been Scorsese's influence on cinema now?
Now we are talking about a director who is not only at the height of his powers with multiple examples of what an incredible director he is, but this is a man now commentating on the human journey and commentating on what can happen to you and the changes, and also making it personal, right? Like Goodfellas, there's a lot of Martin Scorsese's own life that comes through in this movie. And it's right after Last Temptation, which is his reckoning with religion. So I think both of these films are companion films in discovering who Martin Scorsese is as a person. Now, in terms of filmmaking, this is where he takes even what was already done in Godfather and elevates it. It is a 70s film debuting in the 1990s. It's incredible. And so now we have a guy who is able to tell us not only a personal story, but also show us his perspective on the world and bring all of his incredible talent to bear as a filmmaker and inspire a lot of people to take up a camera, to shoot close-ups in a certain way, to use slow motion in a certain way, to use moments of pausing in a certain way, to use voiceover in a certain way, and to showcase twists and turns in ways that really unsettle you. And then we get to Cape fucking Fear, which I think is another masterpiece, in my opinion, of his abilities to scare the living shit out of you, man. He is now at this point a mature master filmmaker.
Yeah, I hesitate to say like, oh, here he hit his stride, because that's ridiculous to say when he's already made Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and a bunch of other great films.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of confidence, I think, with Goodfellas that's sort of, I got it. And it's also the culmination of these themes that he dealt with in Mean Streets, that he dealt with in Taxi Driver, obviously in Last Temptation of Christ, of honor and violence and moral codes and moral ambiguity next to moral codes, and having us have fun doing terrible things. Like, and that's why I say it's like that screening of Taxi Driver where everyone's laughing. Goodfellas is a really funny movie. It is genuinely fun. Even some of the brutality is genuinely fun. And it's brutal. And I go back to that. He really liked the gangsters that lived in his neighborhood. They took good care of him, and he realized they were monsters.
Yeah, we don't have The Sopranos without Goodfellas.
Oh, of course not. Absolutely
Right?
not.
And we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos this year. We don't have any of that without uh, Goodfellas, you know? And I think Goodfellas influenced a number of filmmakers to get into film, you know, that we see now.
I think Goodfellas is way more influential on The Sopranos than The Godfather is.
Oh, yeah, 100%. They may quote The Godfather,
Oh, they
but
love The
it's
Godfather.
influenced. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny thinking about, this question of him being influential.
Yeah.
I wonder about there's no Reservoir Dogs without Goodfellas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, I think that I know that Tarantino obviously loves Scorsese, but like the humor and the violence and the speed and the way the camera is moving and all that stuff,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of Tarantino in Goodfellas.
It's an independent film masquerading as a studio release.
Yeah.
100%, you know?
You mentioned it already, Cape Fear.
I love this movie. I love this movie. This is, again, he is now a man. He is a man making movies, right? And I say that in the way of like, he is a fully realized, mature human being who is now embracing his love of these movies that influenced him as a kid. Redoing Cape Fear, you know, this is Robert Mitchum, this is Gregory Peck. These are legends.
Right.
He is going to take this film on and give his own point of view on it. And it's a story that still resonates there in the 1990s. The idea, because some people may forget this, but in the 90s, we were absolutely battling all the time about what to do with prisons, what to do with prisoners, what to do with rehabilitation. This was a very big deal in the 1990s. I mean, a lot of people go back to that crime bill that President Joe Biden was a part of. They talk about stuff that was going on there and this idea of, do we have what happens when someone claims to be rehabilitated? And how many times have we heard these stories of people who come out of prison and, just go right back to their life of crime and hurt people? And so there was a lot of that pulsating through this. But Marty also shows us the possible destruction of a marriage. And I don't know if this is reflective of what he might have been going through at the time in his own situation. And also, this is De Niro, him creating yet another iconic character for De Niro to play, a villain that I would put up in the pantheon of villains
Oh,
in Max Cady ever, any villain ever on film. And that scene alone with Juliette Lewis, which is super uncomfortable, but also something we were becoming more aware of, which was teachers having inappropriate relationships with with young students. Of course, it's way bigger now because we see that a lot of the female teachers are having these relationships with male students. But certainly it was happening all the time in certain places that male teachers were having inappropriate relationships with young teenage girls, And so there was a lot of this pulsating throughout. And it's a challenging film because no one, aside from maybe Juliette Lewis, is someone that is a good person in the movie. Jessica Lange does some stuff that's questionable. Nolte certainly with how he
yeah.
handled the stuff with Max Cady. And of course, Max Cady. So this is where you have an interesting challenge as a viewer as you're watching this. And I think the film and what he does and having him spit tongues out and talk in tongues as he's dying in the water, just the last shot of his eyes above the water before he goes under, it's just incredible. Plus the score, which was very Bernard Herrmann-esque.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, I thought, just was genius. So, yeah, I mean, people don't talk about it in the same breath as Goodfellas, but I think Cape Fear absolutely belongs in the same conversation with Goodfellas.
So I haven't seen it a ton, and it's one I didn't rewatch, and now I'm kind of wishing that I had. But one of the big things I remember, and this is, again, it's just a Scorsese thing of like, I'm going to go into the uncomfortable space, and I'm not going to let you feel comfortable.
Yes. This is confident filmmaker. I know you're going to be pissed off, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, and you go to Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver, all of the stuff in King of Comedy lots of stuff is really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And certainly all the Juliette Lewis stuff, like it isn't because she's intrigued by him.
Right.
She's drawn to him. That's what makes it. If she was repulsed by him, he would just be a bad guy and we could sit back. Right. But because she's intrigued by him, we're like, oh God, it's really, really upsetting.
Yeah.
next, he goes off to Japan to play Vincent van Gogh in Akira Kurosawa's Dreams, which I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't either, buddy. I don't either. But
But
I, yeah,
if he had called me and said, "Steve, I want you to come be in my Kurosawa movie," or if Martin Scorsese calls me today and says, "Steve, I want you to come play, Abe
Vincent Van
Lincoln
Gogh.
in something," I would be like, "That doesn't make sense to me, but okay." you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we spoke about it in the Kurosawa series we had, but there's a very strong connection between Scorsese and Coppola
Yeah.
and Lucas to Kurosawa. I'm not sure if Spielberg's connection, but certainly those three are very strong connections. And so, you're going to turn down one of your heroes asking you to come play an iconic painter in your movie? No. I mean, Dreams is a bit of an uneven
Yeah.
Kurosawa entry, I would argue, but it was interesting to see Marty play the character. I just, it's not a great
It's not
decision.
also, but we've said that he follows his whims. He
Yes,
goes
yes.
to do what he wants to make,
Yeah.
and the next thing he wanted to make is not my favorite Scorsese movie, but that's The Age of Innocence. What's your feelings on it?
I mean, I know people like this movie. I know it's reviewed well. I just found it to be very boring.
Yeah.
And I was surprised, and this is the thing about Marty, man. Marty is interesting because, like, I know him. Mr. Scorsese is interesting because, like, I know we had a fan of ours get upset that we weren't, calling them by their Mr. names and Mrs. names. But, like, this is an unusual thing. And I don't think it's New York bad, but I certainly think it's a little boring. And I don't know if Scorsese was the right person to direct this film, but, we wanted to try it out. It speaks volumes that he's never kind of gone back to a film like this ever again. So I thought it was very well directed, and I didn't feel a damn thing when I was watching it.
Yeah, that's how I don't think it's bad.
Yeah.
I all the actors are good, looks beautiful. I have since read the book.
Yeah.
And I didn't love the book either. So but our next film is one that I know that you love, and that's Casino.
Yeah. But again, Casino is one of these films that, like, I did not like when I saw it the first time. I was not a fan of Sharon Stone. I've never been the biggest fan of Sharon Stone for my own personal reasons. Just some actors or actresses just don't strike you, just don't hit you right. And she's never fully 100% hit me right because she's been very much about herself for a very long time. And I don't always like that amongst actors, regardless of gender. And so I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of it. But I have grown, my estimation of this film has grown by leaps and bounds. I've grown to appreciate Sharon Stone's performance in the movie very strongly. But De Niro and Pesci, I love their chemistry in the film. I thought that ending with Pesci and his brother, fuck, man. There are very rare moments in film where I'm sitting in the movie theater and I can't even cry, but I feel this overwhelming sense of just heartbroken sadness, even though this is one of the worst people on the planet.
Terrible, yeah.
To make him watch as you beat his brother to death or within an inch of his life because you buried him alive is just so fucking horrible. But I thought this film was great in how Marty directed it, the cinematography here, the way he progressed the stories, and didn't make De Niro like this badass, guy like you saw in Goodfellas. This is Ace Rothstein. He has like a different approach to the whole mob situation. And Pesci is the one that's even scarier than he was in Goodfellas. And I like the way the film goes down. So now it's one of my favorites to put on whenever, like you said, put on whenever I'm just doing stuff.
Well, it's so funny because I think obviously there's a very strong connection to Goodfellas. Yeah. I didn't love it when I first saw it either. I saw it in the theater and went, okay, it seems kind of Goodfellas, but not as good. That's kind of how I felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting to me about it, first of all, it's not as fun as Goodfellas.
No.
No. Goodfellas with the whole opening montage, all my life I wanted to be a gangster, you're just like enjoying it. You're eating it up. And it's all, but then this is when I rewatched because I knew how much you loved it. So I wanted to rewatch it before we talked about it. I liked it much, much more. I think you got to settle into it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I mean, obviously I've already said De Niro is one of the great actors of all time. Pesci is also an unbelievably amazing actor. And I think what I think you get fooled into thinking, oh, I'm going to watch De Niro and Pesci play gangsters.
Yeah.
And so you assume they're going to be the same. And their characters are nothing like the characters they play in Goodfellas or other films.
Yep.
They're completely their own thing. Pesci, super scary and crazy in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And De Niro is brilliant and an idiot in a different way. Like
Mhm.
the choices that he makes. And the thing about Sharon Stone, you're not supposed to like her.
Right. No, I know. You're not. Right.
Like she is succeeding in doing her job.
Yeah.
I don't find it's not a movie I would go back to and watch all the time but it's all there.
Yeah.
All of Scorsese's skill. And this is the big thing that it really hit me as I've watched a lot of his films over the last several weeks. And also, Killers of the Flower Moon is in theaters. I saw that in theater. Man, this guy knows how to make a movie.
Dude. 100%. Whether the end result is great or not, you never doubt his abilities as a filmmaker. And you're always, even in the bad films, you can find stuff in the films, or how can I say this? Maybe not bad films, but films that aren't as good as his other ones. You can find really great scenes, incredibly well shot moments, and phenomenal performances, even if the film itself doesn't 100% work. And that speaks to the kind of director that he is. Even his misses have hits within them.
There's always a choice. This is the hard thing, and it was always hard when I taught my students. It was like, yes, you could put the camera here at eye level on sticks, a tripod, and film your scene, and you would have filmed your scene. Yeah. But you have not directed yet. You need to make a choice. You need to see the scene in a certain way and film it a certain way, block it a certain way, work with actors a certain way, have the music hit a certain way, have the cuts happen a certain way. And when you're watching a Scorsese film, there's always a choice.
Yeah.
There's always a vision happening, like that's the big thing. And also, man, the guy knows how to work with actors.
Yep.
Like obviously he's the kind of director that actors want to come back and work with over and over again. And he's the kind of director where I think Joe Pesci is a great actor. Is he ever as good as he is in a Scorsese movie?
No, not in these kinds of roles. No.
I mean, like it's just the things that he does. And it's funny. There's a story that came up. This was from King of Comedy that I wanted to mention. This came from Paul Zimmerman, who is the screenwriter.
Yeah.
And they're struggling with the ending of King of Comedy and kind of going back and forth. And Jerry Lewis says he has an idea on how to end the film. And so Paul Zimmerman and Scorsese go in and have a meeting with Jerry Lewis, and Jerry starts talking, and immediately Paul Zimmerman starts shaking his head no. And Marty, it sounds like, if my understanding of the story, is he interrupted the meeting and turned to Zimmerman and said, never shake your head no to someone. And what he said was, as soon as you shake your head no, you are shutting down this other person's creative process.
Yeah.
You could always say no later. He always says yes to actors. He never tells actors that wasn't good.
Right.
He says that was great. Let's do another one. He always wants to get the best work out of actors by positively reinforcing people. And that's how I think. That is exactly my philosophy. And it's so important. I just love that. Never shake your head. You could think that inside, and you could know you're never, ever going to make that choice.
Yeah.
But they could say something that could surprise you,
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
There's a bunch of films that Scorsese made, which are him talking about film. And the first one is 1995, A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Film. If you are Cine-Files, and I think you are because you're listening to our ridiculous show, you need to watch these movies. These movies are for you. Yeah. They are fantastic.
There's a new one out right now on AMC Plus. There's a new series out right now. If you guys aren't watching it, you need to. These great documentaries on film, we don't get them a lot, but when we do get them, you all have to watch them. They're so fun to go back and revisit some of these influences and some of these great approaches to film.
And he has this one. He has My Voyage to Italy, which is all about Italian films. These are just great, great explorations of movies with a great teacher, explaining all this stuff to you. 1997 is Kundun. I first saw Kundun working in that DVD job. And I know I've said this before. There are some movies that I did the DVD on that I watched over and over again. And every time I watched them, they got worse. The Rock was one of these.
How dare you?
And there are some movies that every time I watched them, they got better. And Rushmore was certainly one of those. Big Lebowski was one of those. Kundun is one of those. The more I watched it, the more I was like, this is a really good movie. Have you seen it? What's your feelings on it?
Yeah, no, I saw it. And again, it's one of these films that is incredibly well directed, and yet it did nothing for me.
Hmm.
So yeah, there are just certain Scorsese films, and we're about to enter into a run of a few of them, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. Yeah.
Bringing Out the Dead being the next one, that's one that doesn't do it for me. It's kind of, everyone's like, hey, he's back to his mean streets, Taxi Driver. Paul Schrader wrote it. It's okay.
It's fine. It's all too much in certain moments. And you're just like, okay, if you're into this kind of overdone approach to things, fine. It's your prerogative, but I don't feel anything when I watch that movie.
I have not rewatched his next film, Gangs of New York, in a long time. Not my favorite either.
Yeah, no, I don't like gangs at all. I know some people may. Now you can light your torches if you want, but nothing beyond the first opening scene works for me in any way, shape, or form. I think DiCaprio, this is too early in his career to play this character. He is not the great actor we know him to be now when he's making this movie. Daniel Day-Lewis is a goddamn dynamo in this movie. He is
Oh
the
yeah.
only reason to watch this movie. Cameron Diaz is horribly miscast, as she usually is in any dramas. And I just think the film falls apart on so many. And you have a great collection of John C. Reilly, Brendan Gleeson. There's a great
Yeah.
collection of actors that are a part of this, but it's so disjointed and weird. It does nothing for me, and I don't know why people love the movie. The opening sequence of Liam Neeson, that's awesome. And then once he's dead, the rest of the movie dies for me, really, except for Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, because I love going back and watching. Again, as I said, even within his misses, my belief of his misses, he has hits. That scene with Daniel Day-Lewis talking to Leonardo DiCaprio when he wakes up, and DiCaprio's scared that he knows who he is when he doesn't, and he's talking about his father, DiCaprio's father, without knowing that that is DiCaprio's father, is an awesome, awesome scene. And Daniel Day-Lewis just kills that monologue. So yeah,
I just didn't understand the movie. I really, like I just didn't and it was sort of like this sort of like, well, why is this story?
yeah,
Because I know a bit about the era,
sure,
and it
sure,
just seemed like I didn't understand like why this was the story that you wanted to tell.
yeah,
It didn't, and it's funny, and I'll just say what my bias was too at the time. At the time, I saw Leonardo DiCaprio as a child actor who had a big hit in Titanic and was good and charismatic. But I was like, why are you working with this guy? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't see it yet.
yeah,
I didn't understand how great an actor he was going
sure,
to become.
sure.
But it did. Scorsese says, and we talked about this in Wolf of Wall Street,
Mm.
that discovering Leonardo DiCaprio revitalized his love of making films.
Hey, man, like
You
you
know,
said, he follows his gut. He
yeah,
follows his muse where he goes, and yeah, no surprise. I agree. I mean, he found a younger actor that he can start over with, just like he did with De Niro at the
yeah.
beginning, um, that offered different approaches to certain films that De Niro wouldn't have been able to give to him. And so, yeah, so you see it here in Gangs of New York as well.
And his next film, again with DiCaprio, is The Aviator,
Mhm.
which I liked when I saw it in the theater. And then I rewatched it a few weeks ago and liked it much more. I was actually much more impressed with The Aviator than I had been the first time I saw it.
This is DiCaprio just about to
Yeah,
cross that line, right? This is DiCaprio. It's like Cruise. Just when he does Born on the 4th of July, it's too early, but
right.
you're seeing the beginnings of what will be a great actor. I think the same, and he is a great actor. I don't care what anybody says. Tom is a great actor. And with DiCaprio, this is just before he becomes a great actor, and you see shades of it throughout this movie. And I do, and I like this movie. And it's one of these films that tackled the idea of what that condition is like to
Yeah.
have. I'd never seen it quite that way on film, and I like that Marty pulled no punches in showing it.
Well, and DiCaprio is willing to go for it. Like that, the
Yes.
courage, that's where you see the courage
Yep.
starting of like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do this all the way, you know? And Kate Blanchett is great. And there's a whole bunch of great performances in it. And the way he captures the era is really, really amazing in that too. He also, again, he's following his interests and he makes a bunch of documentaries. I just thought I'd bring them all up here.
Sure.
In 2005, he makes No Direction Home, which is a fantastic documentary on Bob Dylan.
Mm.
There's also Living in the Material World, George Harrison,
Yes.
another great documentary. I have not seen the Fran Lebowitz documentary, but I hear it's fantastic. And the one I knew nothing about, but I'm definitely going to watch, is the 50-Year Argument, which is a documentary about the New York Review of Books. And I'm like,
Ooh.
all right, that's like made for Martin Scorsese wants to do a documentary about the New York Review of Books. I'm in. So, what do you think about some of his documentaries?
Spirits in the Material World, the George Harrison one is great. I've watched that one maybe 5 or 6 times. It's 2 parts. It's 4 hours.
Yeah,
It's incredible. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, I don't think I've seen a documentary about any of the Beatles that comes close to what that
I agree.
documentary is. And you could argue there's a lot to talk about Lennon, a lot to talk about McCartney, but there was just something different about Harrison, the spiritual nature of Harrison that I think was just incredible to explore. And which is, I think, on Max, if you guys want to watch
Mm.
it on Max. Um, what was the first one you mentioned?
Bob Dylan.
Oh yeah, the No Direction Home is great. I think it's a criterion as well. That is I mean, as someone who has had an interesting relationship with Bob Dylan, that documentary was a nice kind of way to maybe contextualize some of my feelings about Dylan and thoughts on Dylan. Because, I don't think I'm smart enough to really appreciate the lyricism of Dylan. And I don't go, let me put on my favorite Dylan songs. That never happens. But I do have like a shit ton of Dylan songs on my iPhone or iTunes rather that I can listen to when they pop on. And I always like and appreciate and respect Dylan. But I don't worship Dylan like other people do. Watching that movie made me understand
Yeah.
why people do.
Pretty much the same for me. Obviously I know the big songs and
Mm,
and admire them, and I understand his importance,
mm,
but I never went down the Dylan rabbit hole. I just never,
yeah,
got all the albums and listened to them over and over again. And I'm sure if I did, I would have that experience, but I
yeah,
haven't done it.
yeah,
2006 is The Departed.
yeah.
It's a great movie, and and this is where he finally gets the recognition from the Academy. And again, issues of violence, loyalty,
Yeah.
rules within particular societies. Great ensemble of actors. It's a really great movie.
Yeah. I like this movie a lot. And I know people make fun of it because, the rat crawling across. And yeah, fine. It went a little too far. If you're going to defend bringing out the dead and you're going to have an issue with the rat, we need to have a conversation about your idea of overdone things. So it is obviously a remake of Infernal Affairs, which is I think the Korean series of films there. But I loved it. As a guy who loves Boston movies,
Mhm.
this is a fucking great Boston movie. And I know Nicholson's accent, Nicholson's performance, it's cartoonish, it's crazy. Again, if you like Bringing Out the Dead and you have an issue with Nicholson's performance, take a look at yourself in the mirror. But it is absolutely one of the best performances of Matt Damon's career. The twists and the turns of the film for someone who hadn't seen the Infernal Affairs trilogy of films were all shocking to me. Martin Sheen, who every once in a while pops up in these feature films with directors that know how to use him, is such a character that you fall in love with. So that what happens to him, it devastates you. The brutal nature with which he showcases some of the situations that are happening in that movie are great. And DiCaprio, this is when DiCaprio's finally crossed
Yeah.
that line into greatness, and you're just like, this is fucking awesome, and a Vera Farmiga, who I think is great, and their electric story or romance, if you want to call it that, that comes throughout the movie. And Baldwin and Wahlberg are all
They're all
great.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, just great. It's an eminently rewatchable movie. You can rewatch that 100 times and enjoy it, man.
It's funny. We were talking about, Color of Money being his most mainstream.
Mm,
This one is too, in a different way. I mean, it's still very much in the Scorsese world,
yeah,
but it also is obviously it was a hugely popular film and won all sorts of awards. Yeah, it's just, and you know what else is about it? I would say
yeah.
maybe that makes it a little more mainstream. It's all movie stars, you know?
Yes, right, right. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, Steve. And as you're saying, it occurred to me as well. It is one of the most accessible masterpieces of his career. It's an accessible masterpiece, right? And whereas other films can be more accessible because they're fun films like After Hours or whatever, this is an accessible one where you can watch and like truly appreciate it, whether you're a cinephile or not, truly appreciate and enjoy the film.
Yeah, as opposed to if you go, okay, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Last Temptation of Christ, and Goodfellas, with every one of those, while they're great films, there are people you wouldn't recommend it to.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You know, you wouldn't, you know, like my sister would not like Taxi Driver. I mean, maybe she's seen it, maybe she hasn't, but like that's not a film for her. You know, like there are people, obviously, lots of people, religious people. Last Temptation of Christ maybe is not where you want to go.
Right, right.
But with the I wouldn't say that for The Departed.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I had never seen Shutter Island, so I watched it for this. I think that you're not a huge fan of it.
I
I
hate
it
that.
it it fell very much into the category of this movie is beautifully made top to bottom.
Yeah.
DiCaprio is acting the shit out of it. I didn't love it, but I appreciate it. I'd say that's where I'd kind of put it for me.
You have to buy into the concept. You have to
Mm,
buy into the idea that the problem is I figured it out within the first 20
right,
minutes, and then I was like, "Oh, they're fucking and it sucks because when we figure out a film early, you're like, "Oh, man." So now it's the job of the film to still keep you in that state of
right,
suspended disbelief or belief, whatever it is. And so that when the thing comes at the end, you can appreciate it and still be caught up in it and be like, "Oh, it's awesome." But for me, it didn't. I knew what she was. I knew it was all a fantasy. I knew he was part of the thing. And I was like, oh, this is like St. Elsewhere. Oh, it's a fucking dream. It's a fucking
right.
snow globe. Oh, so yeah, it just, for me, it just didn't work overall. But you're absolutely right. It's incredibly well directed. Certainly, it's very well reviewed. A lot of people like the movie. So I'm not in any way denigrating anybody who likes the movie who's listening to us. It's just for me, it's not my cup of tea.
I'm just marveling at this moment at this career. I really am.
Yeah,
Like, you know, there's just so much to talk. You know, we've spent a few minutes on each of these movies, all of almost many of which could be a Cinephiles episode
sure.
or episodes. There's so much here, and these even starts to go into television because 2010 is Boardwalk Empire,
Right.
which is a really great series, and obviously is I just love that he's following his interest.
Yeah.
And then there's a movie that I have never seen, which is ridiculous because I have a kid and should have seen it, but I have never seen Hugo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, never seen
Oh,
it.
yeah. I think that's a very sweet film with some nice performances from Asa Butterfield and Chloe Grace Moretz, and Ben Kingsley, Sir Ben. I'm sorry, Sir Ben Kingsley. Uh,
He's pissed at you.
yeah, I've heard he does get mad if you don't
I've
call
heard
him
that
Sir
too,
Ben.
actually.
But it's a great homage to Scorsese's love of film. Right, the Méliès stuff is all through it here, and there's magic and wonder. It's not a film that you're going to go into and be like, oh, wow, this is as good as Goodfellas or whatever. No, it's just, an older filmmaker doing a nice, sweet film about his love of old films that have laid the groundwork for cinema, right? We wouldn't have cinema without Maillet, without some of these people. And so it's his way of saying thank you. And so that's the context with which I watched that film and I like it.
The next film is one that we discussed in depth, which is The Wolf of Wall Street. I think our feelings about it are pretty well documented.
Yes, you can go back and listen to our episode if you want to hear our thoughts on that film for sure.
We certainly had a lot of them. A movie I have no thoughts on because I have never seen is Silence.
I saw Silence.
There was a long silence after you said that.
I think Silence is a film that I'm going to have to revisit later in life because I just did not like it. It's one of these films I had a civil war within myself as I was watching it. And this is a window into the John Roca mind sometimes. I am watching this film, and the whole time I'm watching this film, I'm saying to myself, I know this is an incredibly well-directed film. This is a phenomenally well-acted film. I can tell. And this should be speaking my language because it's also a commentary on religion. But it is laborious in a lot of ways and in a lot of sequences. And I just was like, after a while, I just felt like pounding my head through the wall. And then it ends in such a disappointing way that it just did not work for me. And I know there are defenders of silence, but for me, it's an exhausting film. And it just full of great performances, full of very well shot sequences that does absolutely nothing but exhaust me at the end.
I think there are many signs of a great filmmaker, but I just thought of one as you were speaking.
Mm.
You know what one sign of a great filmmaker is?
Mm.
That you actually will plan on going back to a film you didn't like
Oh yeah,
because you know this is a great filmmaker.
because I want to give him more chances to I want to give him more chances for me to like his film because
Yeah.
I respect him and admire him and love him as a filmmaker. Yeah.
Well, and listen to what how many times we said it. King of comedy transformed for
Yeah.
both of us watching it later in our lives.
Yeah.
We said it. I think we both said it about Casino.
Yeah.
I think,
100%.
it's like there's multiple films in here that we went, I came back to them and like, oh, this is different from what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where a great filmmaker is. And sometimes, and so now I'm curious too. At some point I will watch it, and maybe at some point I will watch it again. One movie that I heard you talking about a ton and I didn't see for a while, probably at least a year or two after you had seen it, and you raved about it, and I was resisting it, and that is The Irishman.
Yeah.
And when I watched it, I'm like, fuck this, because I think in my brain, I was like, okay, Scorsese, we're on the downhill slope of his career. De Niro's old, Pacino's older. Pacino irritates me with his Pacino-ness at certain points. De Niro's done a whole bunch of kind of random stuff that's
Yeah.
okay.
Dirty
But
Grandpa.
yeah, you go like, what do they really have? And then these guys come in and like, holy shit, it's a really fucking good movie.
It is so good, man. And people were like, "Oh, 3 hours." Blah, blah. I sat in that theater. I saw it with Shannon. Shannon came with me to the screening of it in LA. And I remember like we went to have a couple of beers, but then we made sure we pissed before we went in the
Right.
theater. We sat in almost the top row of the section of the theater that we went to see it in. And neither one of us left the theater to go piss. And Shannon leaves the theater 20 minutes in, an
I
hour in.
wasn't going to say anything, but
Yeah, no,
yeah.
look, he doesn't mind. I'm going to out him, Mr. Geek Buddy Shannon McClung. But neither one of us left the theater throughout the entire movie. I didn't even know I had to pee until the movie was over because I was so engrossed in it. And I will die on the hill like Jon Snow in the Battle of the Bastards, defending that movie. I have watched the movie multiple times. It is one of the most engrossing films for me that I've ever seen that is an epic. And we said way earlier in the conversation here that Scorsese, and this has been documented, that he has an incredible love of epics. He had never directed an epic movie. You could argue Last Temptation. You could argue a couple of these other movies. They're possibly epics. This is an epic. This is a gangster epic movie, which is a rarity in gangster films. I think Once Upon a Time in America is another one, the Sergio Leone film. There are rare moments where you get epic gangster movies. This is an epic movie full of incredible performances. You're right about Pacino. He reins Pacino in,
Yep.
lets it work in certain moments, reins him in other moments. De Niro has never been better than he was in this movie. Stephen Graham is great as this foil for Pacino throughout the film. What happens with De Niro and his children, you feel all of it. There's the brutality of Goodfellas. There's the epicness and the long form storytelling that we've seen him do in Last Temptation of Christ. All of his skills come to bear. This is in the top 5 for me of Scorsese films, and no one is ever going to talk me out of it. It is so good, so well written, such a fantastic journey. And again, his slow motion skills works perfectly. The way he brings out the best in Ray Romano. I mean, that was a
Yeah.
revelation for me to see.
He was great.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to rave on and on about it. It's just such a good movie that I'm very happy that he was able to do, as an older filmmaker. And I think he brought all of his skills that he's learned for decades to bear in this movie. And not enough people give it the respect it deserves.
What's remarkable, as we said, or I said when we were talking about Casino, of like, okay, Pesci and De Niro, they're both playing gangsters, and I just picture they're going to play the same characters, and of course those characters are totally different.
Yeah.
Even more so in The Irishman. The Irishman, because now we have Pacino, Pesci, and De Niro, 3 of the great gangster actors of all time,
right?
Coming in, and Pacino's character is nothing like Michael Corleone. Pesci's character is nothing like who he plays in Casino or in Goodfellas. Pesci's character is like the relaxedness of his character, the confidence, the ease of his character in this way. And then De Niro, it's like, here's this guy who's played these huge characters. It's like he's under, you have to watch everything under a microscope. It's so, everything he does is so subtle.
Yeah.
And he's so present, and it's just fascinating to watch them. And it was funny too, because I had heard an interview years ago
Yeah.
with the person who was the son of the De Niro character, telling their
Mm.
discovery of this
Yeah.
story about this person
Yeah.
and whether or not it's true or not. And it wasn't, and I had forgotten it. And then I'm halfway through the movie and realized that I was watching something that I knew about, and I just had this like, oh shit, I know where this movie's going. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I know where this movie's going. Like it's really good. I don't know if I put it in my top five. It's really hard, but it's up there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely up there.
Yeah. It's because I mean, look, it's him bringing Keitel back into the fold, and Keitel doing such a great job with limited amount of screen time. The relationship between Pacino and I'm sorry, between De Niro and Pesci
Yeah,
is completely different. It's the first
totally.
time where Pesci is the alpha to De Niro's beta, and then not that he's a beta male, but just that he's underneath Pesci, and then you throw in the Pacino relationship, and this is way better. Look, oh God, again, I'm going to get in trouble. I I like what we got with them in Heat, and you get one scene in the cafe and then one scene at the end. This is the movie to watch to enjoy
Oh yeah.
Pacino and De Niro on screen together. Their respect for each other as actors, their rhythm in the scenes. As an actor, I'm watching their rhythms in the scenes, incredible. And at the end, you really feel such sympathy for Hoffa, who was a prick, and certainly Pacino plays him as a prick at times. So that when Frank does what he does, you actually feel the tragedy of it,
Oh yeah.
and that is built because of the relationship that Pacino and De Niro have with each other throughout the movie. You can tell they genuinely love each other as people. So that when the twist happens, like when De Niro gets mad that he thinks Pacino has offended him, or Hoffa's offended him, and he's like putting on his jacket. He says, "Oh no, Frank, come on! I don't mean you. Come on, don't." It is so honest and earnest, and
And
the
terrible.
movie,
Just like upsetting. And
yes, because it's in a movie where he's lying to a bunch of people about shit. He is genuinely showing his care for De Niro throughout the movie, and it's great to watch. So yeah.
I don't know if this is actually from Aristotle's Poetics, but I feel
Mm,
like it is. But that tragedy is like the mix of, it's the inevitability that makes the tragedy,
mm,
and that's what you see in that film. Is like you're heading to this
yeah,
direction, and you see particularly the choices that Hoffa makes of
yeah,
like, no, please don't. Oh no, you don't understand where
yeah,
you're heading,
yeah,
and it's just you just feel it getting close, and it's just so horrible
yeah,
watching this inevitability play out. And the ending moment is so sad. It's just sad,
yeah, yeah. Once again, though, that's what the great ones do. Coppola did it. And Scorsese did it in Goodfellas as well. Like the end of Goodfellas is Ray Liotta saying, Henry Hill saying, I eat tomato sauce. Well, no, what is it?
And
And
spaghetti.
ketchup and noodles. Yeah, exactly. That's supposedly spaghetti. And in the end of Godfather, right? It's Michael sitting all alone.
Yeah.
Godfather Part Two, sitting all alone with the leaves going, essentially implying that he is what do you say? A leaf that's fallen off a tree. Is in the fall of his time. And the end of this movie is showing you, like, for all the things he accomplished, he ended up an old man in a nursing home. And this is a commentary on people who are getting older, including Scorsese,
Yeah.
is this idea that we all have to come to terms with, is the greatness of our youth, the greatness of our prime. We may end up in the end just kind of sitting there all alone as an old person, and no one remembers us. No one is there to tell our story. It's just at the end we're just dying, and so it's a really hard ending to accept as you're getting older as a person.
It's all goes back to these explorations of moral codes that we've been talking about the whole in all these films. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's the gangster and the priest. And the gangster and the priest have moral codes that they have to live by.
Mm,
And sometimes in these films, it's like you've got Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver who sees himself as the knight in shining armor.
right,
And yet the things that he does, he's considering assassinating a presidential candidate. And then to save the damsel in distress, he goes and kills a whole bunch of people in this incredibly brutal scene.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, where is this? How do I feel about this? Rupert Pupkin is destined to be the great comedian. And so there is nothing that he won't do.
right,
Like we have in Goodfellas, obeying the code means killing a whole bunch of people and being a really horrible person.
right.
And in in doing what I would consider be the right thing, which is turning in the bad guys, he's now violated the moral code.
Yeah.
Casino has all of these
Oh, yeah.
codes of
Yeah.
how Ace is what he's supposed to be doing, and then he makes everything public. Therefore, he has to be destroyed. And then Pesci, what happens to him? Like, it's all dealing with the same thing. And here we have in The Irishman is this dude who obeyed the quote
Yeah.
unquote code,
Mhm.
and that leaves him alone in this old folks home.
Yeah.
You know,
Without
and
the love of his daughter, who he
yeah,
most wants. Yeah.
and having killed this guy that he really cared about,
Yeah.
that was his friend,
Right.
because he obeyed the moral code.
It's a commentary on adhering to these things. Should you adhere to these things? Because in the end, you're going to lose everybody you love anyway.
Ugh, well, that was depressing.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I love about the movie. It's a 70s aesthetic within the film, even though it's a massive epic film. He's got a 70s aesthetic ending, and I
Yeah.
love that about The Irishman.
Which brings us to Killers of the Flower Moon.
Mm.
So I think it's funny. First of all, it is exactly what we've said throughout, even about the movies that we didn't like as much.
Yeah.
This is an unbelievably beautifully made film.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly was never bored in the theater. I saw it with Shannon McClung, who did leave at least twice to pee, but I did not.
See, that tells you the difference.
I think the performances are spectacular. I think it is going to win Best Art Direction, or it should, because I've never seen a period piece that felt more convincing to me than this movie did.
Wow.
It just felt like this is the real place.
Right.
I think I was involved in the story.
Yeah.
And I don't like this movie. And I have a theory of why I don't like it. It's not, I wasn't bored.
Right.
But I just don't understand this movie. I want to hear your thoughts, and then I'll give you my theory.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about it on the hot mic. Jeff and I broke it down in a review there if you want to hear more of my thoughts, because we're in a consolidated amount of time. So here's what I'll tell you. I respect the filmmaking within the film itself. I think there are some scenes that I would have never seen. I also think this is the filmmaker that got this story told, so you have to give respect to that. But I think Leonardo DiCaprio is horribly miscast in this role. It should have been Jesse Plemons playing that role and DiCaprio playing the FBI agent. It bothers me that he switched roles when he found out when they rewrote it and they made that DiCaprio role bigger. He decided to then switch roles from the FBI agent to that role. So Jesse got the other role, and you get it. Jesse's still building, so you take it. It's a Scorsese, and he put you in fucking Irishman, so you take it. I think Lily Gladstone is a marvel in the film,
Yeah,
and she's incredible up until the point where they drug her for the back half of the film and remove her as an impetus or remove her as an active part of the film, which is so frustrating when he told us he was rewriting the script so that it would be more from the Osage point of view, but the Osage point of view disappears within the first hour of the movie, and then it becomes all about De Niro, who is incredible in the film.
great.
De Niro and DiCaprio's story, so it becomes from the white point of view. And that, people have explained it to me 1,000 ways to Sunday. I'm never going to accept it. That stupid radio play at the end
I don't know.
completely kills the movie as well. And so I think there was incredibly great intentions behind the film, but I also think this is an older filmmaker, an aging filmmaker, who maybe doesn't have that edge, the gutsiness and the edge that he would have had in the 1970s to really tell this story from the Native American point of view. Hire Native American writers, write Native American scenes, write Osage scenes. People go, it's not in the book. Oh, what a surprise. People go off from the book all the fucking time. That's why it's a movie. It's not a book. And so he could have changed it to tell it more from her point of view, to give us more of an idea of the Osage culture, more of the Osage way of life. And so we saw more of their commentary on these white people coming in to take things from them, rather than seeing it from a guy who was confused all the time about what he was doing and was evil, but then supposedly still loved her. And so it just didn't work 100% for me in the end. And I was supremely disappointed because I loved that first hour,
So I'll tell you what my theory is, which is I think that Scorsese did the things that he normally does when making a film, and I think they worked against them in this case. And here's what I mean, is when we did Wolf of Wall Street, and we were talking about all the horrible things that these characters were doing.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up was we both kind of went, oh, we never see the victims. Like,
Mm,
we don't see, it's not about that. It's about the criminals. It's about watching these people do these horrible things. Scorsese is not that interested in the victims, because the same is true in Goodfellas.
yeah.
It's about watching the criminals. The same is true in Irishman. The
Yeah.
same is true in, like, we meet Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver, but it's really not about, we don't care. We're watching the criminal mind. And I feel like what happened in this film was, first they started off with an FBI investigator.
Yeah.
And they went, okay, but that's not really what the movie's. We're going to center on the criminals, which is what Scorsese is good on.
Right.
But then they said, look, you can't ignore these Native American people. We have to tell these stories. So they introduced more of the victims, but they didn't really have anything to do.
Yeah.
And so what happened is that it made them incredibly passive. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
the difference is that in Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not seeing the victims at all.
Right.
So I can just examine the criminal, the horrible people.
Yeah.
Same with Goodfellas. But here I'm looking at the victims the whole movie.
Right.
And Lily Gladstone in particular, I am in love with her, and I think she is fascinating. And then she, as you said, is drugged for an hour of the movie.
Yeah.
And is doing nothing. And all of the other Native people, who I think are beautifully cast, and there was obviously lots of research, and it felt very real and very grounded, but they don't fucking do anything. And we don't have a sense of what this feels like from their perspective, because the movie's not about them. The movie's about the criminals. And so what happens is you have the criminals, that's his strong suit.
Yeah.
But because you've shown us the victims a lot, I can't have fun with the criminals or even really be involved in the story, because, and this is where I just go, I agree with you. This was not the right story to tell.
Nope.
Someone needed to tell the story of the Osage people and how it felt for them. And maybe Scorsese isn't the right filmmaker to tell that story, because he's about the criminals. He's about exploring the dark parts of the human character. And so that's why I go, like, literally I could point to hundreds of shots that are gorgeous and incredible performances throughout the whole thing. And like I said, I wasn't bored.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a good movie.
Yeah, and I've seen some people push back. Well, this Osage person said they liked it. Yeah, and there are plenty of Osage people who say they didn't, including the technical advisor on the red carpet, who said, we just kind of have to accept this. This is a step forward, but it's not really told from the Osage point of view, but it's getting there. So you see that there are, what a surprise! Nothing's a monolith. No group of people are a monolith. So yes, you can see people that liked it and didn't like it within the Osage community. So both points of views are valid about this movie. And so that's where I come back to when people try to push back on the criticism of it, because I'm not coming from the place of like, this movie shouldn't exist. This was terrible. He was the wrong person to tell it. It was more that he told the movie from the wrong point of view. We've seen the white occupier. That is nothing new. We've got to see it from the occupied point of view and take the chance to watch a whole movie where Native Americans are denigrating the white people who have come in to try to take things from them. That's the movie that you should have told. It doesn't mean there couldn't have still been good white people. Certainly the FBI coming in to explore. This is what began the FBI. This is the case that started the FBI coming in and exploring this. You could have had that so that you've got all these points of views rummaging through. I didn't give a shit about finding out more about Ernest and stuff with De Niro. Like, I really didn't give a shit about it because he was an incomplete protagonist in the film, because he 1 second he's like too stupid to understand what he's doing. The next second he's influenced. And the other second he's, drugging his wife the whole time, but still claiming that he loves her. It was ridiculous. I don't give a shit about a limited intelligent guy as a protagonist in a story like this. I've seen it many, many times. Let me see it from the Osage point of view. And as I said, they should have brought in Native American writers, should have brought in Native American technical advisors to make this happen. There were Native American technical advisors, but advisors that said to Marty listening, hey, don't do this. And the truth is, Marty doesn't have a great record telling stories about people of color. He doesn't. He tells stories from white point of view or the Italian point of view. Even in Gangs in New York, when you see all of a sudden black people being killed in the race riots, or the voting race riots, you're like, where the fuck were black people for 3 hours of the movie? Like, he doesn't spend the time that he needs to spend. And it may just be because he doesn't feel like he's the person to tell the story, because he's not of that community. And I totally respect that. But throwing it in, I think, loses its effect because you haven't done enough to establish it. And I think in this in this film, he does kind of a version of that by establishing the Osage culture and then completely abandoning it for the final 2 hours of the
Right.
movie, which is super frustrating.
It's really, I think so. First of all, I'm not of the belief that only a person of a certain group
Mm,
can make a film about that group.
mm,
I think it is certainly possible for respectful people to learn about other cultures or other situations and
sure,
make movies about a lot of different stuff,
sure.
you know, and there are movies that both you and I love that fall into those categories.
Right. Color Purple,
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
incredible job. Yeah,
West Side Story.
yeah.
Like,
West Side Story.
yeah, tons of them. But I also think that Martin Scorsese, in particular, part of his greatness is who he is and where he comes from. His
Right.
own identity as an Italian American child of immigrants, like that. That is part of where his greatness comes from.
Yeah.
And so, him doing something about Native Americans is not suited to his particular greatness in his
Mm,
talent. That's the first thing I think.
yeah.
The other thing I think is that, like there's the Bechdel test of having, it does the movie have two women talking to each
Mm,
other about a thing that's not a man? There were all sorts of conversations that happened among the Osage people
yeah.
that were fascinating, that were not in this movie, that happened at this time during
Mm,
this event.
yeah.
When you have that many people dying around you or getting sick around you,
Right.
they're going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And they never happen in the film. Like, we just don't sit with them and go, what does it feel like? This is an amazing question to me. What does it feel like to be a people that have been conquered and pushed around and messed with and poor, and then suddenly become extremely wealthy?
Yeah.
What does that feel like? And then what does it feel like to have this organization come in and take away your power to control your own life? All those scenes where they had to go to the doctor
Mm,
to decide if they could spend their money, or to, whatever
yeah.
the executor of their trust or whatever. That's all totally fucking bizarre.
Yeah.
But we don't really go into, we see that it happens, but we don't go into their world. We don't hear them talking about,
Yeah.
what do we do about this? How do we change? How do, we see the alcoholic, but we don't see the alcoholic's family and, like, hey, how are we going to, this is a real problem in our community. We don't see them making active choices. They're completely passive through the whole film. And that those humans were not completely passive. They were making choices. They did have thoughts. They did have ideas. They didn't just sit and let it all happen to them. But that's kind of what you see in the movie.
Yeah. He, in a way, he does the thing that he said he wasn't going to do, which is to essentially marginalize Native Americans within their own
Yeah.
story. And it's unfortunate. And again, I don't want to believe it's intentional, because here's the thing that also kind of bothers me. And I know we don't want to end on an overall negative note about Scorsese, is that De Niro, when accepting his award recently, I think for the New York Film Critics or one of these East Coast bodies, his speech denigrating the white occupation of Native American lands, Apple tried to censor his speech,
Yeah.
and De Niro was like, "Fuck you," and delivered his speech as he had written it, because he had written it, and they took it off the teleprompter to make him deliver a more safer speech. That tells me that Apple has been trying to control this thing from the beginning to make it more from the white point of view than the Native American point of view, because they're afraid that white people won't watch it or white people won't like that kind of thing. Because certainly we've seen here in our politically fraught times that anything that denigrates white people, there's a massive part of the political sphere that goes after it. And so maybe Apple felt like this wasn't the approach to take. But in the end, the film didn't make that much money, and certainly it was done for prestige purposes. So the intention wasn't necessarily to make a lot of money, but still, it could have been. I don't think it's a film that people are overwhelmingly wanting to see win Best Picture, like you see for The Holdovers or Oppenheimer or even Barbie, for God's sake. So I think that's kind of a commentary on the approach. And, look, Scorsese is an older filmmaker. He wants to make the films he wants to make, but a filmmaker is always subject to the amount of money he can make or he can get to make a film. And maybe Apple said, okay, you can make some changes, don't make massive changes to tell it fully from the Osage point of view. I don't know. That's just me speculating.
I find that Apple thing shocking, and I think I said to you at the time,
Mm.
I want to know where that came from. Like,
Mhm.
that come from the producer of the show? Did that come from Tim Cook? Did that come from the board? Did that come? And I also go, I strongly doubt that Apple put much editorial control on the making of that film. They brought in Scorsese. I strongly doubt it, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
I
And neither do I. And neither
Yeah.
do I. Just my own personal point of
Well,
view.
the other thing, I don't think that Scorsese's necessarily at his best making a $230 million movie or something like it. It was really big budget.
Yeah.
I don't think that's his sweet spot, even though the movie looks
Mm.
amazing.
Yeah.
But I also agree with you that I do not want to end on a down note.
Yeah.
So I do want to say, first of all, I'm going to repeat it because it's important to say that movie's beautifully made top to bottom.
Yes. 100%.
That guy knows how to make movies. And I think that in having watched a bunch of Scorsese movies over the last several weeks, that's what struck me over and over again was two things. One is he's going to follow what he is interested in.
Hmm.
And two is that guy knows how to make movies.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to ask your final thoughts on Scorsese because that's ridiculous. And we're also going to spend the next couple of months
Yeah.
and even a revisit in Easter, apparently, like going into this guy.
Yeah.
But at this moment, what are you most looking forward to on our deep dives of Goodfellas and Raging Bull and Last Temptation of Christ? And what are your overall feelings about Scorsese as a filmmaker?
Well, I think I'll take the second part first, and that is that for me, I just, as I said earlier, I don't recall an existence when I loved film and didn't know about Martin Scorsese. And still, to this day, still talking about Martin Scorsese, still revering Martin Scorsese as a filmmaker, flaws and all, I think is a great place to be in. There are the rare filmmakers that make it over multiple decades, and he has. And still creating masterpieces. The Irishman was not that many years ago. At an advanced age, that's even rarer for great filmmakers to still be able to create films at that level. And so, to me, what it is that what Martin Scorsese means to me is this is an incredible filmmaker that has been successful in multiple different types of films and has asked us questions about ourselves, asked us questions about our world, taken us down these really interesting paths, and tricked us at times, like with Goodfellas. We fall in love with these characters, but then at the end, we see what happens as the result of the lives they've chosen. And that's really what a lot of his films are cautionary tales about our existence. And so I love that these are the films that Marty is drawn to create these fantastic, thought-provoking pieces of cinema that we can revisit multiple times at different times of our lives and fall in love with it for the first time or fall in love with it again and get so much out of it as a commentary on the human condition. They're not just gangster films, as people like to stereotype them, or they're not just, shoot 'em up films or violent films. There's a lot of commentary about humanity. And I think that comes from Marty's sensitive nature, Marty's upbringing around his family, Marty's upbringing in the church. There's a lot of that coursing through his movies because he is constantly searching for the meaning of existence and constantly searching to tell you stories about humans in these situations that he knows very well. And to answer your first question, I am very much looking forward to breaking down these movies and talking about the minutia of how he constructs scenes, how he shoots certain things, the camera angles, the lighting, the score, how the music cues are laid in through certain scenes. And as Steve mentioned multiple times here, how he finds the humor amongst this drama, amongst this madness of what's going on in these movies, I think is going to be fun to revisit and explore, and how he works with actors and the performances that these actors deliver. Some of them not delivering better performances in their careers before or since because of how he works with them. So all of that I'm really interested in, and to hear your points of views on it as a filmmaker yourself, to hear what stands out for you, because I always learn so much when I hear your points of views as a filmmaker, because I always look at it from the acting and the overall effect and the symbolism. I always appreciate the technical approach you have with it, along with all the other stuff, screenwriting and acting and what have you. So yeah, I'm looking forward to all that as we break these films down in the
Well,
future.
well, first of all, thank you. And of course, I love that. That's why these conversations are so much fun, because I love hearing your opinions as we break this stuff down. I'm excited because we did Goodfellas. I think maybe it was like an hour and a half that we talked about it the first time, or
That's
hour and
crazy.
10
That's
minutes or something
fucking
like that.
crazy.
Well, and that's why I go like, I can't wait to really
Yeah.
look at the moments, because that's what we didn't in our early episodes. We didn't really look at that moment.
Mm.
And the thing is, I haven't watched Raging Bull in a while. It's been at least a decade.
Yeah.
And I love the film, but I've never really thought about it, if that makes sense. I've experienced it,
Okay.
but I have not thought about it in filmmaking. And now going through, we're going to really get into the stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be I think it's going to be really challenging, because spoiler alert, Goodfellas I love.
Yeah.
It's not emotional for me the way that Raging Bull is.
Yeah.
Raging Bull hurts.
Yep.
It is a painful, it's a lot to deal with in terms of emotion.
Yeah.
So, and to go just my feelings about Scorsese in general, I'm going to say a weird thing, which is he's not one of my favorite directors.
Oh,
And what I mean by that is that if you go like, whose movies you want to go watch? Well, I'll watch Steven Spielberg movies all the time. There are all sorts of directing. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like, and I don't think I would put any of his films, certainly not in my top 5 films of all time, and probably not in my top 10 films of all time. I think that Martin Scorsese might be the greatest auteur director of all time.
mm,
I think he might be the greatest person who is pursuing his vision, his
mm.
particular vision.
Yeah.
Maybe up there with Kubrick would be the other one, who's sort of it's like, I'm going to make my films. And I find his films to be difficult sometimes,
Mm,
to be uncomfortable sometimes, to be like, take me into a world that I don't really want to be in that world.
yeah.
Like, I don't feel good in Taxi Driver. I don't feel good in Goodfellas. I don't feel good in King of Comedy or Casino. I know I'm not going to feel good in Raging Bull. Like, these are movies that are difficult,
Yeah.
that bring you into a world that isn't. That's why I go, like, when I say he's not my favorite director, it's not that I don't think he's a great director. I absolutely do. It's that he's not my favorite. You know what I mean? Like,
What he does
because
to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it's going to be hard. It's going to be. And that's why I say it's the auteur. This is his way of looking at the world. This is what he sees when he looks at the human condition.
Yeah.
And he's going to force you to go look at things, maybe even within yourself, that you're not going to be comfortable with. The hard part about Travis Bickle is not going, there's these crazy people out there who are like this. The hard part about Travis Bickle is that when you go, shit, I felt like Travis Bickle.
Mm,
That's the hard part about it.
mm,
And it's the romance in Goodfellas. All my life I wanted to be a gangster.
right.
The hard part about it is that you like it. That's the hard part about
Right.
it. Like, that's throughout his movies. With his great movies, always, it's like, the hard part about rewatching King of Comedy now is I felt a lot like Rupert Pupkin. I've been fucking Rupert Pupkin. I mean, I'm not, but like, I related to that. That's the hard part. So that's my feeling.
Mm. Great.
So
Great words, brother.
So that is at least the beginning of our exploration of the life and films of Mr. Martin Scorsese. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear which are your favorite films. We'd love to hear which movies did you have to come back to at a later time to get a better sense of them? Which movies kind of left you cold? What did you think of Killers of the Flower Moon? Which movies are you excited about taking a look at that maybe you've never seen? And of course, we can't wait to get into our breakdowns of Goodfellas, of Raging Bull, and our Easter special on The Last Temptation of Christ. And of course, if you want to reach us, you can follow us on Facebook, do a search for the Cine-Files, Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, all the other places like Spotify or YouTube. On YouTube, please leave your comments. On Apple Podcasts, we would love to get your reviews. 5 stars if you feel we're worth it. Maybe a lesser number if you feel we don't. If you want to leave that 1-star review where you swear at us and say we're horrible people, you're allowed to do that too, but they're not as much fun for us to read. But if you want to buy or stream, I'm going to do the same thing that we've done for all these other directors. I'm going to create a page on our website that's going to have all these films, I think. It's going to be a lot of pages. If you want to buy or stream anything Martin Scorsese's ever done, you can do so at cinephiles.net. If you want to support the show, you can do it at patreon.com/thecинephiles, where you can ask, actually, if you support us at the right tier, you can ask questions that will appear in our upcoming breakdowns of Goodfellas, Raging Bull, and The Last Temptation of Christ. We love those questions. That's patreon.com/thecinephiles. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would people reach you?
You can always find me at The Roca Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Roca Says, where you can see all my shows that I have there, The Hot Mic, The Geek Buddies, The Jedi Way, and my reviews and reactions, and my other podcasts, The Hot Mic and The Geek Buddies, are out there for you all to subscribe to and enjoy.
And I think that's it for this week. We're going to be back next week with part 1 of Goodfellas as we enter the season of Martin Scorsese.